She was 6 years old, soaking wet, and trying very hard not to look at the food. That was the thing that broke him. Not the mother's hollow cheeks, not the cracked windshield on the rusted car he'd spotted in the parking lot, not even the way the woman flinched when the waitress glanced at them. It was the little girl's eyes, dark and careful, and older than any 6-year-old's eyes had any right to be. Trained, he realized. She had been trained by hunger to want things quietly. Nathan Hale had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. He had survived bankruptcy, grief, and the particular kind of loneliness that only comes after you've lost the one person who made all the money feel like it meant something. He thought he had seen everything life could throw at a person. He hadn't seen those eyes yet. If this kind of story moves you, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The storm came in from the west around 8 o'clock, the way bad weather always seemed to arrive in that part of Texas. Sudden and absolute. Like someone had simply decided the evening was over. Highway 16 turned mean under the downpour. 18-wheelers crawled with their hazard lights blinking orange in the dark. Ditches along the roadside filled fast. The few businesses still open along that stretch. A bait shop, a tire place, a self-storage facility with a busted gate looked like they were drowning slowly and had simply decided to accept it. Millie's Diner sat at the edge of all of it, a low brick building with a neon open sign that buzzed and flickered like it was fighting to stay alive. The parking lot had 3 cars in it, puddles already deep enough to swallow an ankle. Inside, the booths were cracked red vinyl, the kind that had been patched with electrical tape so many times the original color was mostly a theory. The coffee was bad. The pie was good. The radio behind the counter had been playing the same rotation of George Strait and Reba McEntire for probably 15 years without anyone changing it. Nathan Hale liked it for exactly those reasons. He pulled the black SUV into the lot without thinking too much about it. He'd been at the warehouse since noon, a distribution hub outside Delmont that was hemorrhaging money in ways his logistics team couldn't fully explain yet, and his daughter had been patient for almost 7 hours. Patient the way Sophie was always patient, which meant she'd read 2 books and eaten a granola bar and not complained once, which somehow made him feel worse than if she'd screamed the whole drive. "Millie's?" she said, looking up from her book when he cut the engine. "Unless you want to eat gas station sushi." She made a face. "Millie's is fine." They ran from the car to the entrance with their jackets pulled over their heads, which didn't help much. Sophie was laughing by the time they got through the door, shaking rain off her sleeves. Nathan was not laughing. He was 32 years old and already felt like his knees hurt when it rained. He didn't examine that feeling too closely. The diner smelled like coffee and fryer grease and something vaguely sweet, pie warming somewhere in the back. A woman behind the counter named Carol, according to her name tag, looked up from a crossword puzzle and nodded at them. "Sit anywhere, hun." They took the booth by the window. Sophie always wanted the window, even when there was nothing outside worth looking at. Tonight there was just rain running down the glass in long, crooked lines. Nathan slid in across from her and picked up the laminated menu, even though he already knew what he was going to order. There were maybe 6 other people in the diner, an older couple at the far end, working through their meals in comfortable silence. 2 men in muddy work boots at the counter, talking about something involving a truck that had broken an axle. A teenage girl in a corner booth staring at her phone with the focused misery of someone waiting for a text that wasn't coming. Ordinary people having an ordinary evening in an ordinary place. Nathan's entire adult life had been anything but ordinary, and he had come to understand that ordinary was not something to take lightly. "Can I get the chicken tenders?" Sophie asked without looking up from the menu, even though she ordered the same thing every single time they came here. "You can get whatever you want." "And fries." "And fries." "And a milkshake?" He looked at her over the top of his menu. She looked back at him with her mother's eyes. That particular shade of gray-brown that he still couldn't look at directly sometimes without something tightening in his chest. "Chocolate or vanilla?" he said. She grinned. "Chocolate." Carol came over and took their order with the efficient friendliness of someone who had been doing this for 30 years and had long since figured out how to be warm without being exhausting. Nathan ordered the turkey club and black coffee. He watched Sophie arrange the little packets of sugar into a pattern on the table while they waited, and he thought, not for the first time, that she was the most interesting person he had ever met, and he had absolutely no idea what he was doing raising her. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the accident on the I-35 overpass, and there were still mornings when he reached for his phone to call Amanda and got halfway through dialing before his brain caught up with reality. The grief counselor had told him that was normal. He'd stopped seeing the grief counselor after 6 months because the sessions made him feel like he was being studied rather than helped, and he didn't have the patience for it. What he had was a daughter who needed breakfast every morning, and a business that needed running, and a quiet lake house where he could sit on the porch after Sophie went to bed and just breathe. I was not, by any standard metric, doing great, but he was upright. He was present. Sophie was fed and loved and enrolled in a school where she had 2 actual friends and was reading at a 5th grade level. Some days that felt like enough. Dad. He looked up. Sophie was looking toward the entrance. He turned. They had come in quietly, the way people do when they're not sure they're allowed to be somewhere. The woman was maybe late 20s, early 30s, though it was difficult to tell because exhaustion had a way of making people look ageless in the wrong direction. She was wearing a coat that might have been beige once, but had faded to something closer to the color of old newspaper. It was soaked through, not just damp, soaked, the way fabric gets when it's been rained on for longer than any coat can reasonably handle. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her forehead, and she was carrying a plastic grocery bag in one hand that seemed to contain everything she had with her. The other hand was holding her daughter's. The little girl was small for her age, whatever that age was. Nathan guessed around 5 or 6. She had her mother's coloring and something careful in her face that children that young usually didn't have. She was wearing a pink jacket that was too thin for the weather, the zipper broken and held together with a safety pin near the collar. Her sneakers were wet. You could see it in the way she walked, that slight reluctance, each step a little heavier than it should have been. They stopped just inside the doorway. The woman looked around the diner with the expression of someone running rapid calculations. Nathan had spent enough time in boardrooms to recognize that look. It was the look of someone figuring out exactly how much something was going to cost them and whether they could afford it. Not just in money, in pride, in the particular currency of having to accept help from strangers. Carol glanced up from behind the counter. "Help you, hun?" The woman opened her mouth. Then she looked down at her daughter. The little girl was looking at Sophie's plate. The food had just arrived. A basket of fries, golden and still steaming, a plate of chicken tenders with a small cup of dipping sauce on the side. Sophie had already eaten 1 fry. She was in the process of arranging the rest by size, which was a habit Nathan had quietly decided not to ask about. The little girl wasn't staring the way hungry children sometimes do when they're being dramatic about wanting something. She wasn't pointing or whining or pulling at her mother's sleeve. She was just looking. Quietly. Her expression was almost completely neutral, the way a face goes when it has learned that wanting things out loud doesn't get you very far. Nathan felt something move through him that he couldn't immediately name. He had seen that look before. Not on Sophie. Sophie had never wanted for food. Not really. Not the way that look implied. But 4 years ago, early days, before the Series B funding came through, before Hale Global Shipping was anything more than 12 trucks and a leaking warehouse in South Dallas. There had been a week in March when Nathan had looked at his bank account, and then at his daughter, and then at the refrigerator, and done the same kind of quiet, desperate math. He'd figured it out. He'd always figured it out. But he remembered exactly how that math felt. The woman made a decision. Nathan could see it happen in her face, a small closing off, a pulling inward. She straightened slightly and tugged gently on her daughter's hand. "Come on, baby," she said quietly. "Let's go." She was going to leave. Walk back out into the rain with nowhere to go and a hungry child beside her because she didn't have the money for dinner, and she wasn't going to ask anyone for it. Nathan was standing up before he'd fully decided to. "Excuse me." His voice came out quieter than he intended, which was probably good. The woman stopped, but didn't turn around right away. Her shoulders went up slightly, the involuntary brace of someone expecting something unpleasant. "I'm sorry," he said, moving toward the entrance, aware that everyone in the diner was now paying attention. Would you and your daughter like to join us? We've got more food than we can eat." The woman turned then. Her eyes were dark and sharp and tired, and she looked at him with an expression that was some complicated mixture of gratitude and suspicion and something fiercer underneath both of those things. "We're fine," she said. She said it in the particular way that meant the opposite. Nathan had grown up in a house where his father said, "We're fine with the lights cut off and the refrigerator running on whatever could stretch to the end of the month." He knew exactly what "we're fine" sounded like when it was a wall rather than an answer. "I know," he said. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's just a bad night to be out in this." He gestured vaguely at the rain hammering the windows. "My daughter's been asking for company anyway. She's been stuck with me since noon, and I'm not very interesting." From the booth, Sophie said, "That's true," with complete sincerity. The woman's expression shifted slightly. Not a smile exactly, but the preliminary architecture of one. The little girl looked up at her mother. Then she looked back at the basket of fries on Nathan's table. Then she looked at her feet. The woman's jaw tightened. Her eyes went briefly bright. She blinked hard, twice. Then Rosie's stomach growled. It was not a subtle sound. It was a full-body announcement, the kind of thing that in any other context might have been funny. In this context, it was devastating, and the silence that followed it lasted only about 2 seconds, but felt considerably longer. Emily Dawson closed her eyes. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice was flat and careful, stripped of anything that might resemble emotion. "Thank you." They moved to the booth. Sophie slid over without being asked, making room. The little girl, Rosie, Emily said her name was Rosie, stood at the edge of the booth seat and looked at all the food with an expression of elaborate restraint, like she was trying very hard to be the kind of child who didn't show things. "Hi," Sophie said. Rosie looked at her. "I'm Sophie. I'm 8. I like the fries here because they're not too salty. Some places make them too salty. Do you like fries?" Rosie nodded. "You can't have some. I was just sorting them, but I don't actually need to sort them." Sophie pushed the basket toward the middle of the table. "I don't even know why I sort them." Something in Rosie's face broke open, just slightly. A child's smile, sudden and real, with a gap where a front tooth used to be. Emily made a sound. Just one, quickly covered. She pressed her lips together and looked out the window. Nathan studied the laminated menu like it contained information he urgently needed. Carol came back over and Nathan ordered more food without making any particular announcement about it. He just said, "Can we get another round of chicken tenders and some of that soup, whatever's on tonight? And 2 more milkshakes?" And Carol wrote it down without commentary because she had been in the business of watching people long enough to know when to be quiet about things. Emily looked at him when Carol walked away. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I'm not—" She stopped, started again. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's dinner. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. He met her eyes and didn't look away, which he'd found over the years was the most important thing you could do when someone was deciding whether or not to trust you. People could smell the glance away. It meant you were performing rather than meaning it. "Emily," she said finally. "Nathan." They didn't shake hands. It felt too formal for a diner booth in a rainstorm. "And that's Rosie," she said, nodding toward her daughter, who had now eaten 4 fries in quick succession and was attempting to eat a 5th one with great dignity, as if she were not in a hurry at all. "Sophie," Nathan said, even though introductions had already happened. "She's very confident," Emily said, watching Sophie explain to Rosie the correct technique for dipping a chicken tender in honey mustard. "She terrifies me sometimes," Nathan said honestly. Emily almost laughed. The sound got stopped somewhere before it could fully happen, but the shape of it was there. The food came. Rosie ate. That was the truth of the next 20 minutes, and everything else was peripheral to it. She tried to be neat about it. Nathan could see her trying, see Emily watching her and subtly signaling with her eyes to slow down, to use a napkin. But hunger doesn't really respond to manners coaching, and eventually the trying fell away and Rosie just ate the way she needed to, quickly and completely, clearing her plate with the focused intensity of a child who had learned not to take food for granted. Emily watched her daughter eat and did not watch Nathan, but Nathan watched Emily, not in any presumptuous way. He was just observant. It had made him good at his job, noticing people. And what he noticed was this. Emily Dawson had the face of someone who had been told very clearly by circumstances that she did not get to feel things right now. The grief and the exhaustion and what he suspected was a months-long accumulation of small humiliations had all been pressed flat, compressed into something she carried without showing. But watching her daughter eat, watching Rosie have enough, had cracked something in the surface, just slightly. She was beautiful in the specific way that people are beautiful when they drop the performance of being fine. Nathan looked back at his coffee and drank it. "You mentioned you used to work at a bookstore," he said, because she had mentioned it, somewhere in the fragmented conversation around ordering, and he'd caught the word used to and the particular quality of silence that came after it. Emily's hands tightened slightly around her mug. Yeah, she said. Small place. Morrison's Books. Off Clement Street. I know that area. It's closed now. She paused. It was mine. I worked there for 6 years, and when the owner retired, he offered to let me buy it. Which I did. Which was probably, she made a short, humorless sound. Which was probably not the smartest financial decision I've ever made, in retrospect. When did you open it? 2 years ago? She looked at the table. Closed 8 months ago. He didn't ask why. He had a sense she would tell him if she wanted to, and that being asked might make her close off again. She told him anyway. It started with Rosie getting sick, not catastrophically sick, Emily said. Nathan had the sense she was careful to qualify that, to make clear that her daughter was fine now, that it was not the kind of story that ended in tragedy. But sick enough. A respiratory infection that became pneumonia. That became a hospitalization that lasted 9 days. And Emily had no insurance beyond the bare minimum because she'd been bootstrapping the bookstore on a loan she was barely keeping up with, and the bills had come in stages the way serious debt always does, each one arriving just when you thought you'd gotten your footing back. She'd done what people do. Payment plans. Balance transfers. Borrowed from her sister until her sister stopped returning calls. The store couldn't run itself, she said, and I couldn't be there. And I had a part-time employee who was 22 and lovely, but she'd never run anything. And 3 weeks of me being gone, and essentially the whole operation sort of... Emily made a gesture with her hand, something between a collapse and a scatter. The regulars stopped coming in when the hours got inconsistent. Some of the inventory orders got messed up. And then I came back and tried to fix it, and I almost did. I was really close, actually. And then I got a certified letter from the landlord saying he was raising the rent by 40% because he'd gotten an offer from a coffee chain. How much notice? 60 days. Jesus. Yeah. She almost smiled. Yeah, that's pretty much what I said, except with more adjectives. She'd tried to negotiate. She'd looked for investors. She'd done a GoFundMe that raised enough to pay 1 month's utilities and not much else. She'd sold inventory at cost, then below cost, trying to generate enough cash to find a new location. Then the debt collectors started calling, and the collection calls went from twice a day to constant. And somewhere in there, Rosie had a follow-up infection that required another round of specialists. And at some point, the math just stopped working, no matter how many times Emily ran it. I lost the apartment 3 months ago, she said. The car was paid off, at least. That's something. The car, Nathan said carefully. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. We're fine, she said. It's manageable. He thought about the cracked windows he'd seen in the parking lot. The car parked at the far edge of the lot, not close to the entrance. Not where you'd park if you were just getting food. How long have you been in the car? She opened her mouth, closed it. Emily. About 6 weeks, she said finally, quietly, addressed mostly to her coffee mug. Rosie was showing Sophie something on her fingers. Some counting game, apparently. They were both very focused on it. Sophie was counting along seriously, making sure to get it right. She didn't know, in the way that children don't know when adults have stopped performing normalcy, that something heavy was happening on the other side of the booth. There's a shelter, Emily said, before Nathan could say anything. But the wait list is long, and they separate adults from kids in the transitional housing, and I'm not leaving her in a separate room somewhere with strangers, so... She straightened. It's fine. We've got blankets. I parked near the grocery store on Archer because there's a security guard who knows we're there and he doesn't bother us. It's fine. She said it's fine the way you say something when you have said it enough times that the words have lost all connection to meaning and have become just a sound you make to get through the moment. Nathan said, okay. She looked at him, apparently surprised he hadn't argued. Okay, he said again. Eat something. You've been talking and you haven't eaten anything. She looked down at her bowl of soup like she'd forgotten it existed. She picked up the spoon. She ate. By 9 o'clock, the storm had escalated from bad to genuinely alarming. Nathan could see it through the diner windows. The rain was now coming sideways, and somewhere out on the highway, there was the red and blue flicker of emergency lights, where something had gone wrong. Carol had turned on the local radio station, and they were broadcasting road closure information. Highway 16 southbound near the 34 interchange is blocked due to flooding. Drivers are advised to avoid the area and seek shelter until conditions improve. Emily was looking at the window. Rosie had fallen asleep sitting up, her head leaning against Emily's arm. Emily had moved without seeming to notice she was doing it, curling herself slightly around her daughter to give her something to lean against. "You can't drive in that," Nathan said. "We'll wait it out. The diner closes at 10. She didn't answer that. "The car's been sitting in a parking lot for 2 hours in 40 degrees and rain," he said. "It's going to be cold." "Nathan." Her voice had an edge to it. Not hostile exactly, more like controlled. She was looking at him the way someone looks when they can see exactly where a conversation is going, and they're not sure they can survive the kindness of it. "I appreciate dinner, genuinely, but we don't know each other. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger." "That's smart," he said. "You're right. That's actually the right call." She blinked. She'd been ready for an argument. "Sophie," he said, without looking away from Emily. "Yeah?" "Would you tell Emily about the lake house? Describe it to her." Sophie considered this. "It's where we live. It's got a big porch with a swing that squeaks. The lake behind it has turtles in it. We counted 14 once, but Dad says I probably counted some of them twice. There's a guest room with a blue quilt. I picked it out because Aunt Vera said I could. It smells like cedar." She paused. "Why?" "Emily and Rosie are trying to decide if they should come stay with us tonight." Sophie looked at Rosie, asleep against her mother's shoulder, and something shifted in her expression that was older than 8. Sometimes Nathan looked at his daughter and could see exactly who she was going to be, and it knocked the breath out of him. "You should come," Sophie said to Emily, simply. No drama, no salesmanship, just the obvious offered plainly. "It's a really bad storm." Emily looked at the window. She looked at her sleeping daughter. She looked at Nathan. "I don't even know your last name," she said. "Hale," he said. "Nathan Hale." Her brow furrowed slightly. The name meant something to her. He could see it. That brief flicker of recognition that people got sometimes when they heard it, the sense of having heard it somewhere before. But she was tired, and the connection didn't quite complete. "One night," he said. "There's a guest room with a blue quilt. In the morning, if you want to leave, we'll drive you wherever you need to go. No obligations, no strings. I've got a security team that you'll see the moment we pull up, so you'll know exactly who you're dealing with." "You have a security team?" She said it flatly, like the sentence didn't quite make sense yet. "I do." She stared at him. "Nathan," she said slowly. "What do you do?" He picked up his coffee. "Logistics." She waited for more. "Shipping," he said. "Shipping," she repeated. "I own some trucks," he said, which was technically accurate the way that the Pacific Ocean contains some water is technically accurate. Outside, the wind hit the diner hard enough to rattle the windows in their frames. Somewhere close, a trash can went over. The emergency radio was still listing road closures. Rosie shifted in her sleep and made a small sound and pressed her face more firmly against her mother's arm. Emily's throat moved. "One night," she said. "One night." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted. Not resolution exactly, more like the temporary lowering of a defense, because the cost of maintaining it had become too high. "Okay," she said. "One night." They paid the bill. Nathan paid the bill, and Emily didn't fight him on it this time, which told him more than anything else she'd said about how tired she was, and gathered themselves to leave. Carol handed Sophie a to-go bag with 2 extra pieces of pie in it that nobody had ordered. "For tomorrow," she said, with the deliberate vagueness of someone choosing not to explain their generosity. Sophie said thank you with complete sincerity and carried the bag like it was important cargo. Rosie was still half asleep, and Emily lifted her with the practiced ease of a parent accustomed to carrying a child in every state of consciousness. They made it to the entrance, and Nathan pushed the door open. The rain hit them immediately, cold and relentless. "Let me get the car," he said, and pulled out his phone. Emily watched him type something and frowned. "Why are you texting someone? Is someone driving for you?" Just a second. From the far end of the parking lot, headlights came on. Not just the SUV's headlights. 3 vehicles arranged around the lot in a pattern that was clearly not accidental. A man in a dark jacket came jogging through the rain toward them with an umbrella. "Mr. Hale," he said, directing the umbrella over Sophie, and then realizing there were more people than expected and adjusting awkwardly. "Sorry, let me get another." It's fine, Marcus. Get the vehicle around front. Yes, sir. Emily had gone very still beside him. The SUV pulled up. Not a regular SUV, she was realizing, but something large and armored and quiet in the particular way of very expensive things. Marcus opened the rear door and Sophie climbed in with the cheerful lack of ceremony of someone who had grown up around this and found it completely unremarkable. Emily stood in the rain with her sleeping daughter and looked at the car and then at Nathan. Logistics, she said. Yeah, Nathan Hale. She said his name differently this time. The connection had finally completed. He could see it happening, the pieces assembling themselves behind her eyes. Hale Global Shipping, one of the largest private logistics operations in the country. Forbes list. The photo she'd seen somewhere, in a waiting room magazine, a news feed, somewhere. The photo of a younger man in a sharp suit at some business conference, captioned something about disrupting the freight industry. She looked at him. You own some trucks, she said. He said nothing. How many trucks? It's a complicated question. Nathan. 14,000, he said, give or take, not counting the rail contracts. The rain fell on both of them. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel. He stopped, searched for the right word. Managed, he said finally. I didn't want you to feel managed. She looked at Rosie, asleep against her shoulder, small and wet and trusting in the way children are trusting even when they've learned not to be. One night, she said again, like an anchor. One night, he agreed. She walked through the rain to the SUV and got in, and Marcus closed the door behind her, and Nathan stood for a moment in the parking lot alone, the rain soaking through his jacket, wondering what exactly he had just started. The drive took 40 minutes through weather that had no interest in cooperating. Emily sat in the back of the SUV with Rosie across her lap, the little girl fully asleep now, and she looked out the window at the dark Texas landscape going past and tried to make sense of the night. Sophie had fallen asleep too, leaning against the window on her side, her mouth slightly open, the to-go pie bag clutched against her chest like a stuffed animal. Nathan sat in the front passenger seat. The security driver, Marcus, navigated without commentary. The two follow vehicles stayed a discreet distance behind. After a while, Emily said quietly, She doesn't act like a billionaire's kid, Nathan said, without turning around. I was going to say she doesn't act like a child who's had things easy. He was quiet for a moment. She lost her mom when she was 5. Emily didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. Amanda, he said. The name came out flat and practiced, the way you say a word you've said 10,000 times and have worn smooth. 3 years ago, car accident. It happened fast. He paused. Sophie doesn't remember as much as she thinks she does, and she remembers more than she lets on. That's kind of how she is about everything. Emily looked at the sleeping girl with her pie bag. She's something, Emily said softly. Yeah, Nathan said, she is. The lake house appeared out of the dark gradually. First a gate at the end of a private road, then the gravel drive, then the building itself, large and low and lit with warm amber light from windows that reflected in the rain. A wide porch ran the length of the front, and Emily could see a swing on it, slightly visible in the dark. It was beautiful, in the careful way of something that was clearly expensive but had been arranged to feel lived in. There were muddy boots on the porch steps, a child's rain jacket hanging from a hook beside the door, a handprint of some dried mud on the railing that hadn't been cleaned yet. The housekeeper, a sturdy, unsentimental woman named Dora, who had apparently been called ahead, met them at the door with towels and the expression of someone for whom no situation was unexpected. Guest room's made up, she said. I left out sleep clothes, should fit well enough. Kids' room is across the hall. She looked at Rosie. There's a small bed. We used it when Nathan's niece visited last spring. Emily stood in the entrance hall of a house that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes, holding her sleeping daughter, dripping rain onto a hardwood floor. I'll show you, Dora said, and led her down the hall before Emily could think too hard about any of it. Nathan stood in the entrance with the sound of rain on the roof above him, listening to the house settle and breathe around him. Sophie stirred against his shoulder. He'd carried her in without waking her, a practiced parental maneuver, and mumbled something he didn't catch. Okay, Bug, he said softly. Let's get you to bed. He carried her upstairs to her room and took off her wet shoes and pulled the blanket over her and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the dark. The rain was softening. He could hear it tapering off against the roof. He sat there for a while after Sophie was completely asleep, not thinking about anything in particular. Then he went to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea because he thought Emily probably wasn't going to sleep right away, and neither was he. And after a few minutes she appeared in the kitchen doorway in borrowed clothes, a too large flannel shirt and track pants, with damp hair and bare feet, and the expression of someone who has been so far outside their comfort zone that the comfort zone is now theoretical. "Tea?" he said. She looked at the 2 cups already made. "You were expecting me," she said. "I was hoping," he said. "There's also whiskey if you'd rather." She sat down at the kitchen table, a wide farmhouse table with scars in the wood, and a coffee ring stain near one end that had clearly been there a long time. She put both hands around the mug. "Rosie's out," she said. "She's a hard sleeper once she goes." Sophie, too. Silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly. The particular silence of 2 people who have already said things they don't normally say to strangers and are now unsure where the edges of the conversation are. "I'm not going to be a problem," Emily said suddenly. He looked at her. "In the morning, we'll go." "I won't. I know what this looks like. A woman with a kid showing up in a billionaire's house. And I don't want you to think—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm not looking for anything from you." "Okay," he said. "I mean it." "I know you do," he said. "That's actually why I offered." She stared at him. "People who want something from me don't usually have that look on their face when I offer to help them," he said. He was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to say the next thing. "My wife used to call it the 'I don't want your help' face. She said it was the only face that was worth trusting." Emily's expression softened around the edges in a way she probably wasn't aware of. "She sounds smart," she said. "She was," he said. Past tense, steady. She really was. They drank their tea in the kitchen while the rain wound down outside. They didn't talk about anything important. Emily asked about the turtles in the lake, and Nathan told her about the time Sophie had tried to name all 14 of them and ran out of names she liked after 6, and had to start using names from whatever book she was reading at the time. So there were now turtles in the lake named Atticus and Gatsby, and one named Mr. Toad. Emily laughed. A real one this time. Small, but real. Nathan didn't say anything about it, didn't make a point of it. He just let it be there in the kitchen with them. Outside the lake house, the storm was finally passing. The rain slowed to something gentle, and then to nothing, and the night went quiet in the way that Texas nights do after rain, that vast, water-clean silence like the whole world had just exhaled. Emily finished her tea. She stood up. "Thank you," she said. And then, before he could give her the standard dismissal of "it's nothing" or "no problem," or any of the comfortable deflections, "I mean it. Thank you." He looked at her and said, "You're welcome." She nodded once and went down the hall to the guest room with the blue quilt. Nathan sat at the kitchen table alone for a while, with his empty mug and the quiet of the house around him, and the smell of rain coming through the screen door he'd cracked open. He hadn't felt that quiet in a long time. He woke up to the sound of giggling. It took him a disoriented moment to process where the giggling was coming from and why it sounded like 2 separate people. And then he remembered. He found Sophie and Rosie in the kitchen at 7:15 in the morning, both of them in sock feet, standing on separate chairs and apparently very seriously engaged in the task of pouring cereal. Rosie had chosen the wrong bowl size, and the cereal was now slightly beyond the bowl's capacity. Sophie was explaining this calmly. Rosie was listening with great seriousness. Emily was standing in the kitchen doorway watching them, coffee in hand, and she looked over at Nathan when he appeared, and her expression was... It was complicated. Grateful, obviously. But something else underneath that, something that looked like watching 2 children pour cereal together, was the most extraordinary thing she had seen in months. He thought it probably was. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. She looked back at the girls. "She woke up and she wasn't scared," Emily said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "She usually wakes up scared. In the car, she stopped, cleared her throat. "She woke up and she saw the blue quilt, and she said, 'Mama, are we at a friend's house?'" Nathan watched Rosie and Sophie negotiate the cereal situation with grave mutual respect. "What did you tell her?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "I told her yes," she said. "I told her yes, we were at a friend's house." He went and got himself a coffee and didn't say anything else about it. Some moments didn't need commentary. He had learned that at least. They had breakfast together at the farmhouse table, cereal for the girls, eggs that Nathan scrambled with more confidence than skill, toast that came out slightly burned and got eaten anyway. Rosie ate everything on her plate and then looked at what was left on Sophie's plate with enormous restraint until Sophie pushed it toward her and said, "I'm full, you can have it," in a way that somehow managed not to be condescending. Outside the windows, the lake was flat and silver in the morning light. The storm entirely gone, the sky washed clean. The 14 turtles, or however many there actually were presumably somewhere in the shallows doing turtle things. Emily helped clean up. Nathan told her she didn't have to, and she did it anyway, which he respected. At some point, she said, "I should figure out our next step. There's a shelter intake office in Delmont that opens at 9, and if I get there early enough—" "You don't have to leave today," Nathan said. She looked at him carefully. "I'm not—" He stopped, considered the sentence. "There's no agenda here. I'm just telling you that the room is there and nobody needs it. That's all." She looked at Rosie, who was showing Sophie something. A drawing she'd apparently done in the night on a piece of paper she'd found somewhere, a house with a big tree and 4 stick figures in front of it. Sophie was studying it intently. "She drew us," Sophie told Emily seriously. "All 4 of us. See, that's your hair." Emily looked at the drawing for a long moment. "You've got excellent hair," Nathan said. She turned to look at him, and whatever she was going to say, she didn't say it. "One more day," he said, "and then you decide." She looked back at her daughter's drawing, at the 4 stick figures in front of the house with the big tree. "One more day," she said. Outside, the lake caught the morning light and held it, bright and still, and somewhere out in the shallows, a turtle climbed onto a rock and sat in the sun, because some things are simple when everything else is not. The second day became a third day without either of them making a decision about it. That was the strange thing, and Emily would think about it later. How there was no moment where she said, "Yes, we're staying," and no moment where Nathan said, "Please don't go yet." The day just continued the way the morning had, in small, ordinary increments, and by the time she checked the clock, it was 3 in the afternoon, and Rosie was somewhere on the back porch, learning what Nathan claimed were the names of 14 turtles, and the shelter intake office in Delmont had closed at noon. She'd meant to go. She'd genuinely meant to go. She'd also spent 40 minutes sitting at the farmhouse table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of her, looking at her phone and the shelter's website, reading the intake requirements. Proof of address, which she didn't have. Proof of income, active or recent, which she had lost. Documentation of circumstances. She had that, in the form of a thick folder of medical bills and eviction notices that she kept in a plastic bag in the trunk of the car, organized by date, because organizing things was the one form of control she still had. The shelter could take 4 to 6 weeks to process her case before placement. 4 to 6 weeks. She'd put her phone face down on the table and stared at the grain of the wood. Dora had come through with laundry, Emily's and Rosie's things, washed and folded without any discussion of it happening, and had set them on the end of the table and left without comment. That was the thing about Dora. She had the gift of doing things without making you feel like things were being done to you. Emily had sat there with the clean laundry and the upside-down phone and the cold coffee and felt for the first time in 8 months, not urgently afraid of the next 5 minutes. It was a disorienting feeling, like reaching for a step that wasn't there. She heard Nathan's voice from outside, low and patient, explaining something to Rosie about turtles. Then Rosie's voice. "But how do you know it's the same turtle?" And Nathan, "You look at the shell markings. They're like fingerprints." And Rosie, after a pause, "My fingerprints are different from Sophie's?" And Nathan, "Everybody's are." And Rosie, satisfied. "Okay." Emily picked her phone back up. Put it back down. She stayed. That night, Nathan made pasta that was correctly described as adequate. He overcooked it by 2 minutes and undersalted the sauce and knew both things while they were happening and couldn't fully course correct in time. Sophie told him it was fine. Rosie ate 2 full bowls. Emily ate 1.5 and said it was good and was clearly being generous, and Nathan appreciated the generosity enough not to argue with it. "I can cook," Emily said while they were cleaning up. "If you want, tomorrow. I'm not should be doing something while we're here. I don't want to just—" "You don't have to earn it," Nathan said. She turned from the sink and looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. Not offended exactly. More like the sentence had landed somewhere complicated. "I know that," she said. "I want to. There's a difference." He handed her the dish towel. Okay, she said, and turned back to the sink. He leaned against the counter and watched the window above the sink go dark with evening, and thought about how the kitchen felt different than it had yesterday. Fuller, somehow. More inhabited. He'd been in this house for 2 years, just him and Sophie and Dora 3 days a week, and the rooms had all been technically in use, but something about them had felt like they were waiting for something he couldn't name. He didn't examine that thought too closely. He was not the kind of man who examined feelings as they were happening. He examined them later, usually at night on the porch, when the lake was dark and there was no one to perform composure for. "I saw the news this morning," Emily said. He went still. "On my phone," she said. "I was looking up the shelter information and I had a news notification." She kept her back to him, still doing the dishes. "Hail Global Shipping. You were at some conference in March. The article had your picture." He waited. "You said you owned some trucks," she said. I said it was a complicated question. "Nathan." She turned around. The dish towel was in her hands and she was wringing it slightly without appearing to notice. "The article said your company moves 30% of domestic freight through 4 states. It said your net worth is—" She stopped. "It was a number that I don't know how to conceptualize." "Numbers are just numbers," he said, which was something his accountant had told him once, and which was not actually true but occasionally useful. "Don't do that," she said. Not angry, tired. "Don't be casual about it. I'm trying to have a real conversation." He looked at her. "Okay. What do you want to know?" "I want to know why you were in a diner off Highway 16 in worn jeans eating a turkey club by yourself." "I was with my daughter." "You know what I mean." He did. He pulled out a chair from the table and sat down in it sideways, one arm over the back, and thought about the honest version of the answer versus the easier version. "I had a meeting at the Delmont warehouse," he said, "and I was hungry, and Sophie was hungry, and it was raining. That's all." "You could have had someone bring food to the warehouse." "I could have," he said. "I don't like eating in warehouses, and I don't like having someone bring food to me like I can't go get my own." Emily looked at him for a moment. "How long have you been doing that? Going to regular places like nobody knows who you are?" "Since Amanda died," he said. It came out more direct than he'd intended. "Before that too, a little. But after the accident, I stopped caring about the public version of things. The profile, the appearances. Sophie needed a dad, an actual dad. Not a PR asset." He paused. "And honestly, I needed not to be Nathan Hale, the logistics billionaire, for a while. I needed to just be some guy eating a turkey club." Emily was quiet, looking at him. "You're still him, though," she said finally. "Regardless of the genes." "Yeah," he said. "I know." She turned back to finish the dishes, and they didn't talk for a few minutes, just the sound of water and dishes and the girls' voices from somewhere in the house, some game that sounded involved and rule-heavy based on the explaining going on. "I'm not going to tell anyone," Emily said, "about any of this. You and Sophie, the house. I know you probably get people who—" "I don't think that about you," he said. "You don't know me. I know you tried to leave a diner to protect your pride even though your kid was hungry," he said. "That's enough." She shut off the water, dried her hands, folded the dish towel, and set it on the counter with the kind of precision that speaks to someone who has been keeping things in careful order under pressure for a long time. "I'm going to make dinner tomorrow," she said. "Don't argue with me about it." "I wasn't going to," he said. She went to check on Rosie. Nathan sat at the table by himself for a while, in the way he'd come to think of as his particular version of rest. Not thinking about anything exactly, just being still in a room that no longer felt empty. The third day was easier than the second. It had its own problems. Rosie had a nightmare around 2 in the morning that woke the house, and Emily sat with her until 4 and looked hollowed out at breakfast, and Sophie spilled an entire glass of orange juice across the table and cried about it with a disproportionate intensity that told Nathan the crying was about something other than the juice. He cleaned up the juice without making a thing of it, and later found Sophie on the porch swing and sat next to her and let the swing move back and forth in silence until she said, "Do you think Rosie and Emily will come back if they leave?" "I don't know," he said, because he didn't. "I think they should," Sophie said. She wasn't pleading, she was stating a position, clearly and without performance. "Rosie's funny, and Emily looks at things like she's actually looking at them, not just waiting to talk." Nathan looked at his daughter. "That's a perceptive thing to notice," he said. Sophie shrugged. Mom used to say most people aren't really listening. They're just taking turns talking. Emily's actually listening. I was quiet for a moment. Sophie almost never talked about Amanda directly. When she did, it was usually like this, casual, matter of fact, a reference dropped in passing. He'd learned not to react visibly to it because reacting visibly made her stop. Yeah, he said, she does that. They sat on the porch swing together until Emily appeared at the screen door and said, in a voice that meant she was trying to sound casual and almost achieving it, "Is it okay if I use the whole kitchen? I need counter space." Nathan said yes, and the smell of something that was not overcooked pasta and undersalted sauce began to drift through the screen door, and by 6 o'clock, Emily had made a chicken stew with biscuits from scratch that was aggressively, almost accusatorially good, like it was making a point. Rosie watched her mother cook with the particular pride of a child who knows their parent is doing something well, standing close and handing her things when asked, and occasionally announcing to Sophie what each ingredient was with the gravity of a surgical assistant. Nathan ate 2 full bowls and didn't say anything sarcastic about his own pasta from the night before, because some things didn't need to be said. My grandmother taught me, Emily said when he asked. She was from Louisiana. She said the secret to any stew was patience and stock, in that order, and anything you added after that was a matter of character. She said it the way people say things that were told to them young, automatically, like reciting something still lodged in the muscle of memory. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Nathan said. She died when I was 12, Emily said. The flatness in it wasn't cold, it was just well worn. But yeah, she was. The girls were eating across the table and debating whether turtles had a favorite color, which was a debate with no possible resolution, and they both seemed aware of that and engaged with it enthusiastically anyway. Nathan watched the 4 of them at the table. The mismatched plates because Dora had done the dishwasher wrong, and some of them weren't dry yet. The biscuit that Rosie had already eaten half of before realizing she should save some for the stew. The orange juice that was slightly past its date, but still fine. And felt something happen in his chest that was unfamiliar enough that he didn't immediately have a name for it. Not happiness exactly. Or not only that. Something more specific. Something that had a quality of, oh, so this is what I've been missing, which was simultaneously good and terrible. The way realizing you've been hungry always makes you hungrier. He looked at the biscuit on his plate and ate it and didn't say anything. That night he sat on the porch for a long time after everyone was in bed. The lake was still, moonlight flat on the surface, the frogs doing their relentless overnight work. He drank half a beer and thought about his lawyer, Marcus Trent, and about the debt collection situation Emily had described. The calls, the letters, the amount that had accrued from the medical bills, and the back rent combined, which she'd mentioned in passing once and tried to minimize, but which Nathan, who had once been intimately acquainted with the specific mathematics of being over your head, had quietly extrapolated into a realistic number. It was solvable. He knew that without doing much calculating. The number was significant to Emily and manageable to him in the same way that a single board is heavy to carry across a field and inconsequential to move with the right equipment. He knew how to move it. The question was how you did something like that without making someone feel like a problem being solved rather than a person being helped. I thought about Emily in the kitchen, making stew from her grandmother's Louisiana recipe, moving through a space that wasn't hers with the purposeful efficiency of someone who needed to contribute something in order to feel that they had a right to be there. He thought about Rosie handing her mother ingredients with surgical seriousness. He thought about Sophie's voice on the porch swing. She looks at things like she's actually looking at them. He finished the beer and went inside. The phone call he made to Marcus Trent the next morning was one of those calls that took 7 minutes and set things in motion that would take several weeks to fully resolve. Nathan kept it brief. He gave Marcus the relevant information: Emily's name, the approximate nature of the debt, the collection agencies likely involved, and Marcus, who had worked for Nathan for 6 years and had the gift of not asking questions that weren't his to ask, said he'd look into it and be in touch. Nathan did this from the dock, standing at the end of it with his shoes off and his feet above the water, while Emily and the girls were inside doing something that involved construction paper and what sounded like an elaborate craft project. He kept his voice low, not because anyone was nearby, but because some things felt like they should be said quietly. He didn't tell Emily. Not that morning, not that day. He told himself he'd tell her when there was something concrete to report, which was true, and also that he didn't want to make it into a thing before he knew whether it was going to work, which was also true. And also he knew she'd argue with him about it, which was the truest thing of all. What he did tell her that afternoon was that she should stay through the weekend. It was Thursday. He had nothing pressing at the office. His executives were capable people who had learned to manage without him physically present, which had been a difficult lesson for all of them in the early years. And Sophie didn't have school until Monday. It made sense, he said, practically speaking. Emily looked at him for a long time from across the kitchen table. Nathan, she said. Just the weekend, he said. You're doing a thing, she said. What thing? The thing where you make something sound logical and practical when it's actually something else. He opened his mouth, closed it. What's the something else? He said. She looked at her hands on the table. I don't know, she said quietly. That's the part I'm trying to figure out. He didn't answer that directly because there wasn't an answer to it yet. That wasn't either too much or not enough. Instead, he said, the girls are good for each other, which was true and also not what they were talking about, and they both knew it, and nobody called it out. Through the weekend, Emily said. Yeah. She nodded once and got up and went to find Rosie. The weekend arrived the way weekends do when you're not actually resting, full of small events that assembled themselves into something that felt, from the outside, like regular life. Saturday morning, Nathan took all 4 of them out in the small motorboat he kept at the dock, which he operated with the confidence of someone who had been on this particular lake enough times to know where the shallow spots were, and the humility of someone who had also run aground on them twice. Emily sat at the back of the boat, with her face turned slightly up toward the sky and her eyes half closed. Not asleep. Just receiving, Nathan thought, just letting something in. Rosie sat in the middle of the boat and dragged her hand through the water and announced the temperature. Sophie counted turtles on the bank with great seriousness and disputed Nathan's count. That one moved, Sophie said, pointing. It went behind that log. So it's a different spot, but the same turtle, so we shouldn't count it twice. Good logic, Nathan said. Dad, are you actually paying attention, or are you just saying that? I'm driving the boat. You're going 3 miles an hour. Speed is relative. That doesn't mean anything, Emily laughed from the back of the boat. The open air kind, no catch in it, just a laugh. Sophie turned around to see and looked pleased with herself, like she'd been the cause of it, and was glad. Nathan kept his eyes on the water ahead and allowed himself, briefly, to notice that he was somewhere that felt like forward instead of standing still. That night, Emily made something else from her grandmother's mental cookbook, a cornbread that she described as not fancy, just correct. And Nathan grilled chicken on the back porch with an aggressively average level of skill. Rosie fell asleep on the couch with the TV on low before 8 o'clock, Sophie close behind her, and somehow neither of them made it to their actual beds. Nathan got a blanket from the hall closet and covered them both without waking either, which was a skill acquired through years of practice, and found Emily already on the back porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea when he came back out. He sat down. The night was warm. The lake was doing its quiet thing. I need to start thinking about next steps, Emily said. She said it to the lake, not to him. Practically. The shelter system has a wait list, I know that. But there are some transitional housing programs that work differently. Ones that don't separate parents from kids. I looked them up on my phone this week. She paused. The bookstore idea is, I know it sounds crazy, starting over on that, but it's the only thing I've ever been actually good at. You're good at other things, Nathan said. Name one. Cooking. That's a hobby. Making a child feel safe, he said, even when you're scared yourself. That's not nothing. She was quiet. And you're honest, he said. Annoyingly honest. Like you'd rather have an uncomfortable conversation than a comfortable lie. Most people don't have the stomach for that. Annoyingly honest, she repeated. I meant it as a compliment. It sounded like a personality flaw. It's both, he said. Most good qualities are. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the lake. The frogs were at it again. What were you like before? She said. Before Amanda. It was a question that most people didn't ask, because most people in his life knew the before and the after separately, and were careful about the boundary between them. He thought about it honestly. More focused, he said. On the business. All of it. The growth, the numbers, the next thing. Amanda thought I worked too much. She was right. I was good at it, and I liked it, and it was easier than a lot of other things. He picked up his glass of sweet tea and held it without drinking. After I worked less and felt it more, like I'd been walking with my eyes down for years and I finally looked up and didn't recognize where I was. That sounds lonely, Emily said. It was, he said. Is, she said, more gently. A correction, not a wound. He looked at her. I'm not I'm not projecting, she said quickly. I just mean, it doesn't stop being the present just because you got used to it. He thought about that. Yeah, he said. Is. They sat with that for a moment. Me too, she said. Just that. Not elaborating. She didn't need to. Her version of the loneliness was different from his, built of different materials, coming from different directions. But he recognized the shape of it the way you recognize a kind of weather you've been in before. Tell me about the bookstore, he said. What it was like, when it was good. She looked at him like she wasn't sure if he actually wanted to know. I mean it, he said. So she told him. She talked for 20 minutes about Morrison's books with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, the way people talk about things they love when they're not performing the loving of them. She talked about the smell of the place, old paper, and the specific brand of wood cleaner the previous owner had used for 30 years. She talked about the regular customers, the retired teacher who came in every Thursday and left with 3 books and a running commentary on everything she'd read that week, the teenager who'd been working through the science fiction section shelf by shelf since freshman year, the couple who used to have date nights in the back corner armchairs, taking turns reading passages to each other. We had a cat, she said. Morrison's cat. He'd been there longer than I had. Old orange tabby named Gerald, after Gerald Ford, apparently, though the original owner never explained why. Gerald died 6 months after I bought the place. She almost smiled. I cried more about Gerald than I cried about the business failing, which probably says something about me. It says you had your priorities right, Nathan said. She laughed, short and surprised. Then she looked at the middle distance again. I miss it, she said simply. I miss having a place. Somewhere I was supposed to be. Understood that the way you understand things you felt in your body rather than thought with your mind. He'd built Hale Global from nothing in his late 20s, from 12 trucks and a leaking warehouse and a business plan that his first bank had rejected twice. And the having of it, the having of something that was his and that he'd made and that needed him to keep it going, was something he'd taken for granted until recently. Until he'd started to understand that it was possible to have a thing and still feel that you had nothing. You'll have it again, he said. She looked at him. I'm not saying that to be nice, he said. I'm saying it because you talk about it the way people talk about things they're not actually done with. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the dark lake. Then she said, You're annoyingly perceptive. Personality flaw, he said. Also a compliment, she said. They sat on the porch until past 11, talking about things that didn't matter, and things that did, in the way that long conversations work when the important parts sneak in sideways while you're discussing something else. At some point, Emily mentioned her sister, Carla, who lived outside Austin, and who had stopped returning calls after the 3rd loan request, and something in her voice around the edges of Carla's name told Nathan that the money had been the smaller wound. At some point, Nathan mentioned the distribution hub in Delmont, the accounting irregularities that had brought him to Highway 16 in the first place, and Emily asked a question about logistics routing that was sharper than he expected, and they ended up talking about supply chain economics for 20 minutes in a way that surprised them both. How do you know about distribution networks? He said. The bookstore, she said. Small business supply chain is its own whole thing. I spent 18 months trying to figure out why my distributors' lead times were inconsistent. She paused. It was the secondary warehouse in Memphis. They were routing around it without telling anyone. He stared at her. What? She said. My Delmont problem, he said slowly. The accounting irregularities. It's a routing issue. Someone's running freight around the primary hub. To cut costs? Or to skim, he said. Off the top of the rerouted routes. Emily looked at him. Yeah, he said, already thinking, already pulling at the thread of it. Yeah, I need to make a call in the morning. It's midnight. In the morning, he said again. Yes, I said in the morning. She looked at him with something in her expression that was not entirely unlike amusement. Okay, she said. Sure. You might have just saved me a very expensive audit. You might have accidentally hired me as a consultant, she said. He looked at her. She'd said it lightly. A joke. But under the lightness was something real and earnest and slightly frightened, like a sentence that had come out further than she'd intended. He let it sit for a moment without filling it in. Good night, Nathan, she said, and stood up. Good night, Emily. She went inside, and through the screen door he could hear her checking on the girls on the couch, the soft sound of a blanket being adjusted, a murmured word. Then her footsteps down the hall to the guest room. The guest room with the blue quilt that she'd been in for 4 days now. One night that had become a weekend, that had become what exactly? Nathan wasn't certain. Something that had its own momentum. Something that he wasn't sure he wanted to stop. He sat on the porch for another half hour and thought about the Delmont warehouse, and about Marcus Trent, and about the way Emily talked about the bookstore, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and about the four of them on the boat that morning, Rosie's hand dragging in the water, Sophie counting turtles with elaborate seriousness. He went inside. He did the thing he almost never did, and locked the front door without checking it twice, because the house felt, for the first time in 2 years, like something was actually inside it worth locking in. He went to bed. He slept. Woke. The Monday conversation happened in the kitchen, while the girls were outside and the morning was still early and golden through the windows. And it started the way a lot of important conversations started, which was sideways and by accident. Emily was making coffee. Nathan was standing at the counter pretending to read something on his phone, which was not what he was actually doing. He was thinking about how to say a thing, and whether to say it, and how much of it to say. "I called my lawyer," he said. She turned around. "I asked him to look into the debt situation," Nathan said. "The medical bills and the back rent and the collection accounts. I wanted to know what the actual picture was before I said anything." Emily's face went very still. "The picture," he said carefully, "is manageable. From my position. Meaning I could have Marcus make some calls and get the collection agencies to settle and clear the accounts, and it would take a few weeks and cost me. Not much by my standards, which I understand is an almost offensive thing to say." He paused. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I want to do this, and you should tell me if you're going to hate me for it." She said nothing. She had both hands around the coffee mug, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. "Emily, I need you to stop," she said. He waited. "I need you to stop for a second because—" She put the mug down. "This is happening very fast." 4 days, he said. 4 days. Yes. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. 4 days ago I was sleeping in my car, and now I'm in a lake house, and you're talking about clearing my debt. And I can't, Nathan, I can't keep track of where the help ends and where something else starts. If something else is starting, I don't know if something else is starting. Neither do I, he said honestly. But the debt is separate. That's not, I would do that regardless. Regardless of what? Of what this is, he said, or isn't, or hasn't figured itself out yet. She looked at him for a long time. He held still, which was the only thing he knew how to do when waiting for something important to resolve. "If you do this," she said slowly, "I need it to be alone." "Emily, alone," she said. "I keep the record of it. I pay it back." "That could take years." "I know. That's fine. I'm serious, Nathan. If it's a gift, I can't take it. I'm not. I need to be able to look at it in 5 years and know that I settled my own debt. Do you understand that?" He did, completely. He had been that person, in an earlier version of his life, the person who needed to be able to tell the story of having handled their own situation, who needed the narrative of survival to be their own. "Loan," he said. "No interest, long timeline. I'll have Marcus draw something up." She exhaled. "And you have to let me cook again," she said. He almost laughed. "Already planning on it." She picked up her coffee mug and held it for a moment and then said quietly to the mug, "I don't know how to do this. Accept help. I've never been good at it." "Nobody is," he said. "People who say they are usually just comfortable accepting things from people they don't respect enough to care about." She looked up. "It's harder," he said, "to accept something from someone who matters." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked out the window at the lake where Rosie and Sophie were doing something on the dock that involved sticks and a complicated debate. The morning light was doing that thing it did sometimes over still water, that particular flat gold that made everything look briefly like it was lit from inside. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word, no drama. Just the simple, effortful, human thing of letting herself be helped. Outside, Rosie and Sophie's debate escalated into laughter, something tipping from argument into absurdity, the way children's arguments often do. Emily watched them through the window, and something in her face settled, slowly, like silt coming to rest in still water. Nathan watched her watch them. said nothing. The morning held. Marcus Trent called back on a Wednesday, 10 days after Nathan had first asked him to look into it. Nathan took the call on the dock, same as before, shoes off, feet above the water. The lake was doing its mid-morning thing, flat light, a heron standing at the shallow edge near the far bank, the kind of stillness that made noise elsewhere feel incongruous. He kept his voice low out of habit, even though Emily was inside and there was no one else around. Marcus ran through it the way Marcus ran through everything, clean, sequential, without editorial comment. 3 collection agencies, 2 medical accounts from Rosie's hospitalization, one with a balance that had been sold twice in accrued interest at a rate that was technically legal and practically predatory. Back rent on the apartment plus late fees. The bookstore lease termination penalty, which the landlord had tacked on despite the circumstances, and which was, in Marcus's measured legal opinion, probably challengeable, but not without cost and time. Student loans and deferment but building. Total exposure somewhere in the neighborhood of $84,000. Manageable? Marcus said, in the particular way he had of asking questions where he already knew the answer. Handle it, Nathan said. Settlement offers across the board. The medical accounts will take 40 cents on the dollar, maybe less. The lease penalty is the stickiest piece. Handle it, Nathan said again. And the structure? Loan agreement between her and me. Have Jennifer draft something clean, reasonable repayment terms, long timeline, no penalties, no interest. A pause. Nathan, I know what I'm doing, Marcus. Do you? She's not going to take it any other way, Nathan said. This is her condition. Another pause, shorter. All right, I'll have something to you by Friday. Nathan hung up and sat on the dock for a while with the heron. The heron was very committed to its stillness. Nathan respected that. What he hadn't told Marcus, and what he was not entirely comfortable admitting to himself, was that the $84,000 was almost beside the point. He'd spent more than that on a single conference sponsorship in February without thinking about it for more than 2 minutes. The loan structure wasn't about the money. It was about Emily being able to look at the situation in 5 years and see herself as someone who had handled it, which was a thing he understood because he had built an entire empire, partly on the fuel of needing to be able to say that he had done it himself. The complication was that doing this thing quietly, without fanfare, without making it into a defining act of charity, was exactly the kind of thing Amanda would have done. Amanda, who had once paid a stranger's overdue electric bill without mentioning it to anyone for 3 months, who discovered it only by accident. Amanda, who thought generosity performed for an audience wasn't generosity at all. I didn't like noticing the parallel. It made him feel like he was doing something complicated that he didn't have the emotional vocabulary to fully examine yet. He went back inside and didn't say anything about the call. The days had developed their own shape, which was something Nathan hadn't anticipated. He'd expected the week's end to feel like a decision point, but instead it had blurred into something ongoing without anyone making a declaration about it. Emily made breakfast most mornings with a focused efficiency that Nathan recognized as her version of earning her keep, which he didn't argue with because she'd been clear about needing it and he was trying to learn when to step back. Dora had, with characteristic wordlessness, shifted her schedule to accommodate the changed household, coming in fewer hours, adjusting the things she cleaned and left, giving Emily room in the kitchen without any of them discussing it out loud. Sophie had begun treating Rosie's presence as simply factual, the way children absorb changed circumstances if the adults around them are stable enough to give them permission. She'd assigned Rosie a specific drawer in her bedroom for Rosie's things. She hadn't mentioned it to Nathan. He discovered it by accident when he was putting away laundry and found the drawer labeled in Sophie's careful handwriting, Rosie's drawer. Do not reorganize. He'd taken a breath and put the laundry away and not said anything. Rosie, for her part, was a different child than the one who had stood in a diner entrance staring at food with a carefully neutral face. She wasn't a different child, fundamentally. The seriousness was still there, that particular watchfulness that kids develop when they've learned that situations can change fast. But she laughed more freely, and she'd stopped flinching at unexpected sounds, and she'd started doing the thing that children do when they begin to feel safe, which is to test the edges of things. Small tests. Asking for seconds, leaving a toy in the living room overnight, going to find Nathan herself when she had a question instead of waiting to ask her mother to ask him. He answered her questions the way he answered Sophie's, which was directly and without talking down to her, and she seemed to approve of this approach. She'd started following him to the dock in the mornings, not for any stated reason, just to be there. She'd sit on the dock boards with her feet hanging and watch the water, and sometimes ask questions and sometimes say nothing, and Nathan had come to appreciate the company. One morning, she said, out of nowhere, "My dad doesn't live with us." "I know," Nathan said. "Mom doesn't talk about him." "Some things are hard to talk about," he said. Rosie considered this. "Sophie's mom is dead," she said, not cruelly, just factually, in the way children state hard things when they've been turning them over for a while. "Yeah," Nathan said. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," he said. Rosie nodded slowly, like this was the answer she'd expected and she was filing it in the appropriate place. "Do you think it gets less?" He looked at her. She was 6 years old, and she was asking him a real question with her eyes on the water, legs swinging over the dock edge. "It gets different," he said. "It stops being an emergency and becomes something you carry. You get stronger so it feels lighter, but it doesn't get less, not really." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "That's what I thought." He didn't ask her what she was carrying. He figured she'd tell him if she wanted to. She didn't that morning, and he let her keep it. When he went back to the house, Emily was at the kitchen table with her laptop. He'd given her the Wi-Fi password on day 3 without making it into a gesture, just writing it on a post-it and leaving it next to the coffee maker. And she was looking at something with the focused, slightly grim expression of someone doing research they don't entirely want to find. He poured coffee and looked over her shoulder, not trying to be subtle about it. Commercial real estate listings, retail space in the city, small square footage, street level. "Clement Street?" he said. "Different parts of town," she said. "Clement's priced out." She didn't look up. "I'm just looking. I'm not making any moves yet. I just need to know what the landscape is." "That's smart," he said. "Know the market before you plan." She did look up then, slightly suspicious, like she'd expected pushback. "You're not going to say anything about it being too soon?" "Why would I?" "Because I have no capital and no credit line and a debt situation that is currently being handled by your lawyer." "Marcus is finishing the settlement paperwork this week," Nathan said, sitting down across from her. "Once those accounts close, your credit picture changes. And there are small business programs, SBA loans, local development funds, that look at current situation, not just history." She stared at him. "You already looked this up." "I might have asked my business development team to pull some information," he said. "Nathan, I run a company. I have people who pull information. That's not—" "You had your business development team research my theoretical future bookstore. I had them pull publicly available data on small retail financing programs in this metro area," he said. It's not specific to you. It's general information." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're impossible," she said. "I've been told," he said. She looked back at her screen. A small smile was pulling at the corner of her mouth, the kind she tried not to let get too large, which Nathan had noticed was a habit she had. Like she'd learned to keep good feelings small in case they didn't last. "There's a space on Dunmore Street," she said, turning the laptop toward him. 1,200 square feet. The rent is manageable if the traffic is right. It's close to a residential neighborhood, good foot traffic, demographics skew toward the kind of people who actually buy books. He looked at the listing. Brick front, big windows. A little rougher around the edges than the photos were trying to present, the way real estate photos always tried to hide the peeling paint and the slightly uneven floors. But the bones were right. He could see why she'd lingered on it. "It needs work," she said. "The photos don't show the whole place. I can tell from the angles." "How can you tell from the angles?" "When a photographer doesn't show you the left side of a room, there's something wrong with the left side of the room," she said, matter-of-factly. He looked at the photos again. She was right. "What do you think is wrong with it?" "Water damage, probably. Or a bad electrical situation. Something structural they don't want you to see before you fall in love with the windows." She tilted her head. "I'd want a full inspection before I got attached to it." "Have you contacted the listing agent?" "Nathan, I haven't. I'm looking. I'm not in a position to—" "Contacting a listing agent to ask about an inspection isn't making a move," he said. "It's gathering information, which is what you're already doing." She looked at him. "You said you wanted to do this yourself," he said. "I'm not arguing with that. I'm saying doing it yourself doesn't mean doing it blind. Contact them. Get the facts. Then decide." She looked back at the laptop screen and he watched her do the particular internal negotiation that he'd come to recognize over the past week and a half. The weighing of pride against pragmatism. The testing of whether accepting advice was the same as accepting charity, the checking of her own motivations. "I'll think about it," she said. He let it go and drank his coffee. The call from his operations director, Carol Huang, came that afternoon and derailed the rest of his day. Carol had found what the audit was struggling to locate. A logistics coordinator at the Delmont hub named Roy Estes, who had been rerouting approximately 8% of weekly freight volume through a secondary carrier he had a quiet financial interest in. It was not a sophisticated scheme. It was the kind of scheme that worked because it was small enough not to trigger automatic flags, and because Roy Estes had been with the company for 9 years and nobody had thought to look carefully. Nathan spent 3 hours on the phone. He was not loud about his anger, which was a thing people who didn't know him well sometimes underestimated. They expected volume and got instead a very quiet, very precise dissection of what had happened and what was going to happen next, delivered in a voice that didn't rise above conversational volume and somehow landed harder for it. By the end of the 3 hours, Roy Estes had been suspended pending a full investigation. The secondary carrier contract had been terminated, and Carol had a clear mandate for what the full audit needed to cover. He came out of it somewhere around 4:30 and found Emily in the living room, reading. She looked at his face and said, "Bad afternoon?" "Manageable," he said, which was the word she'd used about the car situation back at the diner, and he watched her notice that. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Okay." She went back to her book. He sat down at the other end of the couch and put his feet on the coffee table, which Dora disapproved of, but Dora wasn't here this afternoon, and stared at the ceiling for a while. The house was quiet. The girls were outside. The lake was doing its thing. "Someone was stealing from you," Emily said, without looking up. He looked at her. "You get a very specific kind of quiet when something's been done to you that you didn't expect from someone you trusted," she said. She turned a page. "I recognize it." He thought about the landlord who'd raised her rent 40%, and the sister who'd stopped returning calls, and the distributor who'd routed around Memphis without telling anyone. 9 years, he said. He'd been there 9 years. "The time makes it worse," Emily said. "Not better." "Yeah, because you start wondering what else you missed," she said. "What else was happening while you were paying attention to the wrong things?" He looked at her. "I used to do that with the bookstore," she said quietly, "after it closed. Run back through it all, looking for the moment I should have seen it coming. The lease, the insurance gap, the distributor problem. Like if I could find the exact mistake I could." She shook her head. "You can't undo it that way. You just make yourself sick." I was quiet for a moment. "How do you stop doing it?" She looked up from her book. "You find something that requires your attention that isn't in the past," she said. "That's all. You find something in front of you." He held her gaze for a moment. She dropped her eyes back to the page a little quickly, and he looked back at the ceiling. From outside came the sound of Sophie explaining a rule to Rosie about something that required apparent compliance, and Rosie's voice raising an objection, and then both of them laughing. He found his shoulders going down from somewhere they'd been for the last 3 hours. Something in front of him. Right. The loan agreement from Marcus arrived Friday morning, clean and professionally drafted, 6 pages with an attached amortization schedule that had a 15-year timeline and monthly payments that were, by any realistic measure, generous. Nathan printed it and left it on the kitchen table with a pen and said nothing about it before Emily came downstairs. He was on the porch when he heard her go quiet in the kitchen. He gave it a few minutes. Then he heard her come to the screen door. "Nathan." "Yeah." "This repayment schedule is fair," he said. "It's not. Nathan, the monthly payment is smaller than my electricity bill used to be." "Electricity bills are expensive," he said. You're not taking this seriously." He turned around and looked at her through the screen. She was standing with the papers in both hands, and she had the expression she got when she was trying to stay practical about something that was making her feel things she wasn't ready for. "I am taking it seriously," he said. "That's a legal document. Marcus takes things very seriously. If you want different terms, you can talk to him, but he'll just tell you the terms are already structured in your favor and ask why you want to make them worse." She looked at the papers. "It's real," he said. "It's a loan. You'll pay it back. It'll just take a while, and that's okay." He paused. "You said you needed to be able to look at it in 5 years. You will. You'll still be paying it, and it'll be in the record, and it'll be yours." She looked up at him. "Sign it or don't," he said. "But don't argue with the numbers because the numbers aren't the point." She pressed her lips together. He watched her read it again, more carefully this time, going through each section with the focused attention of someone who had once run her own business and knew how to read a contract. Then she signed it. She brought it back through the screen door and handed it to him and said, "I'm making omelets," and went to the refrigerator. He looked at the signature on the bottom of page 6. Emily Dawson, in small, controlled handwriting that leaned slightly to the left. He put it on the counter and went to help with the omelets because he knew better than to make it into a moment, and because he was, in fact, hungry. The trouble with Carla started the following Tuesday. Emily had mentioned her sister twice, once on the porch in the context of the loans that had stopped being returned, once in passing when Rosie asked about Christmas and whether Aunt Carla was coming, and Emily's face had gone neutral in the particular way of someone managing a wound in real time. Nathan had noted it both times and not pushed, but on Tuesday, Emily's phone rang at breakfast with a ringtone she hadn't assigned to anyone in his contacts, meaning it wasn't someone she called regularly, and she looked at the screen and went absolutely still for a moment. "I need to take this," she said, and went down the hall. She was gone for 40 minutes. Nathan made more toast and refilled juice and helped Rosie with the drawing she was working on. A series of turtles, each labeled with their name, which she'd been working on for 3 days with complete seriousness. Sophie was at school. The house was quiet enough that Nathan couldn't help hearing the register of Emily's voice from down the hall. Not the words, just the tone. Low and controlled at first, then tighter, then a long silence, then a few words that were clipped short, the sound of someone keeping themselves carefully in check. She came back to the kitchen with the expression of someone who has just exercised considerable willpower. "Everything okay?" Nathan said. "Fine," she said. He handed her a cup of coffee. She took it. She stood at the counter and drank half of it without sitting down. Rosie had gone back to her turtle drawings with complete focus, either unaware of the tension or choosing not to engage with it, which Nathan suspected was not entirely the former. "She saw the news," Emily said finally. Nathan waited. Apparently there's a piece on some local news website. Someone at the diner, or near the diner, saw us leave together that night." She put the mug down. "The angle is that Nathan Hale was seen with an unknown woman and child, leaving in his vehicle, going to his private residence." She said it in a flat, removed way, like she was reading a report. "Carla saw it." "What did she say?" Emily's jaw moved. "She wanted to know if it was true. I said yes." She said. She stopped. "She said some things." "What kind of things?" "The kind of things," Emily said carefully, "that assume I went to that diner on purpose. That it was strategic." Her voice was very controlled. She used the word calculated. Nathan said nothing. He was watching her face, and what he saw there was not grief exactly, or not only grief. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has been hurt by the same person more than once, and is still somehow surprised each time. "She's your sister," he said. "I know what she is," Emily said. "She's scared for you," he said, not defending Carla, just offering the other possibility. Emily looked at him. "She's protecting herself," she said. "There's a difference." She paused. "She gave me money 3 times. She's been waiting for it to come back to her in some embarrassing way. This is that, in her mind." She picked the coffee mug back up. "I told her the loan exists. I told her I'm handling it. She didn't. She wasn't interested in that part." "What was she interested in?" "In me not making her look bad," Emily said simply. "That's Carla. That's always been Carla." Rosie had gone still over her drawing, pencil hovering. Nathan looked at the back of the little girl's head, at the careful way she was not participating in the conversation while clearly absorbing every word of it. He thought about how much children carried in their bodies, the things that were said in front of them that adults assumed went unprocessed. "Hey, Rosie," he said. She looked up. "You want to go check on the turtles before Sophie gets home? See if Mr. Toad is still on the big rock?" Rosie looked at her mother. Emily managed something that was close enough to a nod. Rosie took her drawing and went out the back door with the focused purpose of a child given a mission. The screen door swung shut. Emily let out a breath. "I'm sorry," she said. "That shouldn't have happened in front of her." "She's okay," Nathan said. "You don't know that. She's worried about you, not about herself," he said. "Kids who've been through hard things watch their parents more than their own feelings. She went out the door because she thought you needed the room." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's a kid who loves her mother." Emily looked at the back door. Something moved through her face. Carla's not entirely wrong, Emily said, quietly, to the window. That there's something to wonder about. Me being here. It doesn't look uncomplicated. Is it uncomplicated? Nathan said. She turned to look at him. I'm asking honestly, he said, not trying to start anything. I'd rather know where we actually are than perform a version of where we are. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, distantly, Rosie's voice carried across the water, reporting something about Mr. Toad with the enthusiasm of a field correspondent. No, Emily said, it's not uncomplicated. He nodded. And I don't know what to do with that, she said. Nathan, I'm still finding my feet. I'm still figuring out what the next year of my life looks like. I can't also be... She stopped. I don't have the bandwidth to be starting something I can't see the shape of. Okay, he said. Okay? She looked like she'd expected more resistance. I'm not trying to push anything, he said. I just needed to know what's real. Now I know. He picked up his coffee. We're in the same house and we're both paying attention to each other, and it's not nothing. That's where we are. That's real enough to work with. She stared at him. What? He said. You're very... She seemed to be searching for the word. Steady, she said finally. You're very steady. It's a little unnerving. I'm not steady, he said. I'm just patient. There's a difference. She almost smiled. What are you being patient about? The shape of things, he said. Things have shapes. You just can't always see them while they're forming. She looked at him for another moment. Then she looked out the window at the lake where Rosie was crouched at the edge of the dock, leaning over to look at something in the shallows. I want to go see the space on Dunmore Street, Emily said. The listing I showed you. I want to call the agent and set up a showing and go look at it with my own eyes. Do it, he said. I don't need you to come, she said. I'm saying it out loud because it makes it more real when I say it out loud. I know, he said. Do it. She nodded once, definitive, like something had been decided. She picked up her phone and went to find the listing agent's number, moving through the kitchen with the particular energy of someone who has just located the next thing to put her hands on. Nathan stayed at the table and looked out at the dock, where Rosie was now standing up and pointing at something in the water, narrating the discovery to nobody in particular with complete enthusiasm. He drank his coffee and thought about the space on Dunmore Street with the big windows and the probably damaged left wall, and about the loan agreement with Emily's left-leaning signature, and about the phone call from Marcus that would come in the next few days, confirming that the collection accounts had been settled. He thought about the shape of things while they were forming. He was not a patient man by nature. He was efficient and direct, and he had spent most of his adult life moving toward objectives with the systematic intensity that had made him very successful and had occasionally, Amanda had pointed out, made him difficult to live with. But he had learned, slowly and not without cost, that there were things in life that moved on their own schedule, and that pushing them didn't make them arrive faster, it just made them arrive wrong. I was trying these days to move at the pace of things. The listing agent turned out to be available, Emily reported from the hallway, and there was a showing slot on Thursday morning. She said it with the brightness of someone working hard to feel hopeful and mostly managing it, and Nathan said Thursday was good, and she said she wasn't asking him to come. And he said he wasn't offering, and they looked at each other with the slight mutual exasperation of two people who had, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, developed a dynamic that neither of them had a clean name for. Rosie came in through the back door at that moment with muddy knees and the information that Mr. Toad was indeed on the big rock, and that there was also a new turtle she hadn't seen before that she believed should be named Gerald. Why Gerald? Emily said. Because Rosie says so, Rosie said, with a 6-year-old's perfect circular logic. Nathan looked at Emily. Emily looked at Nathan. Gerald it is, Nathan said. Rosie went to wash her hands, satisfied. The screen door swung behind her. Emily stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment with her phone in her hand and the listing agent's number pulled up, and her appointment on Thursday, and the shape of something that didn't have a name yet, happening around her in a house that didn't belong to her but had started, in the way that places do when you live in them long enough to feel like it might not be entirely foreign either. She looked at Nathan. Thank you, she said. Not for any specific thing, for the whole of it, he nodded. Just that. Because some things didn't need more than that. She went to make the call. Outside, the lake held the afternoon light the way it always did, flat and bright and indifferent to everything that happened around its edges, which was somehow, Nathan thought, Exactly what you needed from something you could see every morning, something that was just still and present and there. He stayed at the kitchen table and listened to Emily's voice from the hallway, professional and clear, and the voice of someone who had not stopped knowing how to be herself, regardless of what the last 8 months had done to her circumstances. Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days was nothing. He could be patient for 3 days. Thursday came with low clouds and the particular flat light of a Texas morning that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain again or just threaten it all day. Emily left at 9:15 in her car, the car she'd been sleeping in 6 weeks ago, which she'd had serviced at the garage down the road from the lake house, without saying anything about it until Nathan noticed the receipt on the counter, and she said only that she'd used part of the grocery money and would account for it, which he didn't argue with because he'd learned which arguments were worth having. She dressed carefully, not formally. She wasn't trying to look like a businesswoman meeting a bank. She'd put on dark jeans and a gray button-down and her hair back, and she looked like someone who was competent and taking something seriously, which was exactly right for a showing with a listing agent. Nathan noticed all of this and said nothing except, "Good luck," and she said, "I'm just looking," and he said, "I know," and that was that. Rosie went to the elementary school down the road with Sophie that morning. This had begun 4 days earlier, quietly, as a temporary arrangement. The school's principal had known Nathan since a fundraiser 2 years back, and had been accommodating about a short-term enrollment for a child who was between permanent addresses. Rosie had gone the first morning with the expression of someone expecting to be tested and had come home with paint on her elbow and a detailed account of a boy named Theodore, who had very specific opinions about dinosaurs, which she both disputed and seemed to find fascinating. The house was empty for the first time in 2 weeks. Nathan sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and tried to work and mostly stared at the lake through the window. He answered 12 emails. He reviewed 2 quarterly reports. He read the same paragraph of a contract 3 times without retaining it and gave up on the contract. He made a second cup of coffee and stood at the counter and thought about the space on Dunmore Street with the promising windows and the probably damaged left wall. He thought about Emily walking into it with the listing agent, doing what she'd done when she looked at those real estate photos, reading the angles, reading what wasn't being shown, finding the truth of the place underneath the presentation. He thought about how she talked about Morrison's books, the retired teacher on Thursdays, Gerald the cat, the couple in the corner armchairs reading to each other. He thought about how you could hear in her voice, when she talked about it, not just the grief of losing it, but the specific and irreplaceable quality of having had a place that was truly hers. He wanted her to have that again. He didn't examine the wanting too carefully. He just noted it and let it be there, the way you let something sit on a counter until you figure out where it belongs. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Settlement confirmed on medical accounts. Lease penalty under negotiation, should close by end of week. Clean record effective approximately 30 days from today, pending bureau reporting. He typed back, "Good, thanks." He put the phone down. He tried the contract paragraph again, and this time got through it. Emily came back at 11:45. He heard her car in the drive, heard the door, heard her set her keys on the entry table. Then nothing for a moment. Then she came into the kitchen and stood in the doorway, and he looked up from the laptop. Her face was doing several things at once. "Tell me," he said. She sat down across from him. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at her hands. "The left wall," she said. "Water damage?" Previous tenant had a pipe situation. The landlord remediated it, but the remediation was, she pressed her lips together. It was the cheap version. The wall is structurally fine, but there's cosmetic damage that's going to need real work. He tried to say it was minor. She paused. "It's not minor." "Did you say that to him?" "I said I'd need a contractor's assessment before any further conversation," she said. "He did not love that." "That's the right call." "I know it's the right call." She looked up. "The rest of it, Nathan." She stopped, started again. "The rest of it is exactly right. The bones are right. The windows are... There's this afternoon light that comes through the front windows, and it hits the floor at this angle, and I stood in it for maybe 30 seconds, and I thought..." She stopped again. Her jaw worked slightly. "I thought, this is where the armchairs go." He looked at her. "That's the corner with the best light," she said. "The reading corner. That's where it goes." She said it like she was confessing something. "I've been in there 40 minutes, and I'm already placing furniture, and I don't have any furniture, and I don't have any capital, and I have a water-damaged left wall situation, and I've already decided where the armchairs go." That's not a problem, Nathan said. It feels like a problem. It feels like I'm getting ahead of myself again. It feels like the thing I do where I love something before I've verified that it can hold the weight of it. He thought about what to say and decided that less was better here. Is the rest of it viable? He said. Square footage, rent, location. She took a breath. The rent is higher than I'd want, but within range if the foot traffic delivers what I think it will. The neighborhood demographics are right. There's no other independent bookstore within a mile and a half. The square footage is tighter than Morrison's, but I've been thinking about the layout, and actually tighter might be better. More curated, less overhead. Did you ask about lease terms? 3-year initial with an option to renew. No exclusivity clause for retail type, which I specifically asked about because of what happened with the coffee chain. Good. He said there's another interested party, she said. Nathan kept his expression neutral. Did he say who? He said he wasn't at liberty, which probably means there isn't one, and it's a standard pressure tactic. She looked at him steadily. I've done enough leases to know the difference between real competition and manufactured urgency. What's your read? My read is that the space has been sitting for 4 months based on when the listing went up, and an interested party would have moved faster if they were serious. She paused. But I'm also aware that I want that to be true. He nodded. What's the contractor situation? I have a name from... She hesitated. I asked Dora. She said her brother-in-law does commercial renovation work. I have his number. I was going to call him today and see if he can do an assessment this week. He noted that she'd asked Dora rather than him, and he noted that she'd noted him noticing it, and the brief exchange of acknowledgement that passed between them about this. The fact that she was doing this herself, sourcing her own contacts, pulling her own strings, happened without either of them saying a word about it. Okay, he said. I might need your advice on reading the contractor's assessment, she said. Once I have it, commercial construction. I know what I'm looking at in terms of books and inventory and customer flow, but structural repair bids are... I'll look at it with you, he said. You don't have to come to the... I'll look at it with you, he said again, gently. Here, after you have it. You run the showing and the contractor meeting. I'll help you read the paperwork. She looked at him for a moment. Division of labor, she said. Something like that. She nodded. She looked at her hands on the table again, then back up. I need an SBA loan, she said. A small one. The kind for businesses relaunching after hardship. I need to understand the application process. I can connect you with someone at First Central who handles small business development, Nathan said. She's straightforward. She'll tell you exactly what you need without the runaround. Is she going to treat me like a client or a charity case? She's going to treat you like a loan applicant, Nathan said, which is what you are. Something in Emily's posture eased subtly. Set up the meeting, she said. I'll text you her number. You set it up yourself. The corner of her mouth moved. You're doing the thing again. What thing? The thing where you anticipate what I need before I ask for it, and then arrange it so I feel like I asked for it myself. He looked at her. Is it working? She stood up from the table. I'm calling Dora's brother-in-law, she said, and went down the hall with her phone. He listened to her voice from the hallway, professional, clear, asking specific questions about timeline and availability for an assessment, and felt the particular satisfaction of watching someone move into themselves. He'd seen it happen in business 100 times, the moment when someone stopped second-guessing and started executing. He'd never felt this specific about it before. He went back to the contract. He got through the whole page this time. The contractor, whose name was Pete Okafor, and who turned out to be a large, deliberate man with the hands of someone who had been doing structural work for 30 years, came on Saturday morning. He spent 90 minutes at the Dunmore Street space while Emily walked through it with him, asking questions that Pete answered with an appreciation for her technical specificity that was evident in how his answers grew more detailed as the showing went on. Nathan dropped Emily off and waited in the car because she had been very clear about the waiting in the car situation, and spent the time reviewing a supplier contract on his phone and drinking bad gas station coffee that he'd bought 2 blocks away. When she came out, she had 3 pages of handwritten notes and an expression that was cautiously, carefully optimistic, in the way of someone who has decided to let themselves feel a thing but is managing the volume of it. She got in the car and said, "It's repairable." Yeah? The water damage is cosmetic, like Pete thought. The actual structure is fine. The electrical situation is old but functional. Needs an upgrade, not a replacement. He says the whole remediation plus electrical update plus general prep is probably $42,000 to $48,000 depending on materials. She paused. That's a lot. That's not as much as you were worried it was going to be, he said. It's still a lot. It's a known number, he said. Unknown numbers are worse than large known numbers. She looked at her notes. The SBA loan won't cover build-out costs as a separate line. I'd need a commercial improvement clause or a separate equipment and renovation financing vehicle. She said this in the clipped, technical way of someone who had spent the last several days reading about small business financing until it became language she could use. Pete said he can work with a 60-day start timeline if I have financing in place. Do you want me to look at the notes? She handed them over without the usual moment of hesitation. He went through them, reading Pete's estimates, the breakdown of materials versus labor, the phasing options. Pete had organized it well. There was a minimum viable version and a full version, and the gap between them was about $12,000 and 6 weeks of timeline. Start with the minimum viable, Nathan said. Open the store, generate revenue, phase the rest in. That's what I was thinking, she said. Do you have inventory contacts? Some, she said. Morrison's old distributor. I'd want to rebuild that relationship carefully. They knew me before, which helps, but I burned through a lot of goodwill with the late orders at the end. She paused. And there are some publishers who do consignment arrangements for new independents. I know a few acquisition people from the Regional Bookseller Association I was part of. He handed the notes back. You have more infrastructure than you're giving yourself credit for, he said. She looked at him. You're acting like you're starting from nothing, he said. You're not. You have relationships, you have knowledge, you have a clear vision of what the space should be. That's not nothing. That's actually most of the hard part. She looked at the notes in her hands. The hard part is the money, she said. The money is a problem with a solution, he said. Solutions are easier than vision. She was quiet for a moment. They were still parked outside the Dunmore Street space, and she was looking at the front windows, the afternoon light that she'd described coming through them and hitting the floor, the angle that told her where the armchairs went. I'm scared, she said, flat and simple, not asking for anything, just stating a fact. I know, he said. Last time I was scared too, and I did it anyway, and it fell apart. Last time you also had a sick kid and a predatory landlord and a distributor problem and no insurance safety net, he said. Those aren't the same conditions. Some of them might come back. Some of them might, he said. You can't failure-proof a business. You can reduce specific known risks, and you can build better margins, and you can read the lease more carefully, and you've already done most of that in the last 48 hours. He paused. But yeah, it might still go wrong. That's the real answer. She looked at him. I'm not going to tell you it won't, he said. You'd know I was lying. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I appreciate that more than you know. I know, he said. She almost laughed. Let's go get the kids, she said. He started the car. The bank meeting with Elena Vasquez at First Central happened the following Wednesday, and Emily went alone, which Nathan respected so entirely that he made a point of scheduling a call with Carol Huang for the same time slot, so he'd have something to do with his attention that wasn't tracking the clock. Emily came back 2 hours later with a folder and the expression of someone who has been told a thing they needed to hear without embellishment. She sat down across from Nathan at the kitchen table, which had become their default location for things that mattered, and opened the folder. She said yes, Emily said. He kept his face level. What are the terms? SBA 7A program, Small Business Restart Provisions. Primary loan covers working capital and initial inventory. Separately, there's a commercial improvement financing option she thinks I qualify for based on my previous operating history that covers the renovation. She paused. The interest rate is higher than I'd want. The monthly payments on the combined package are, she did the mental math, manageable if my revenue projections are conservative and right. Conservative and right is a good target, he said. She said my projection methodology was sound, Emily said. There was something in her voice when she said it, a small, specific pride. She said most small business applicants either overcook the projections or have no methodology at all. She said mine were structured the way she'd want to see them. He looked at her. I spent 3 nights on those projections, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't ask anyone for help on them. I know, he said. How do you know? Because you didn't ask me to look at them. She looked at him for a moment. She wants a 30-day processing period, she said. Then she said I should be able to move forward on the lease. 30 days, he said. 30 days, she confirmed. He nodded. There was something expanding in the room, Not loudly, not with any announcement, just the simple atmosphere change that comes when something has shifted from possible to probable. Emily felt it too. He could see it in how she sat, something slightly different in her shoulders. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "She asked about my address," Emily said. "For the loan application, current residence." She looked at the folder. "I gave her this address." He said nothing. "I told her it was a temporary arrangement," she said. "While I'm in transition." She didn't ask more than that. She looked up. Is it okay that I did that?" "Of course it's okay," he said. "It's been 3 weeks," she said. "I know how long it's been. I want to make sure that we both know that I'm not moving in," she said. "I'm in transition. And when the store opens and the loan comes through and I have income, I'll find my own place. My own and Rosie's own." "I know," he said. "Emily." "What?" "I know all of that," he said. "You've told me clearly where we are. I heard you. The address is fine. Stay as long as you need while the loan processes. That's just practical." She looked at him. "And then when you're ready to go," he said, "that will also be fine." The second part of that sentence cost him something he didn't show. She probably knew it did. She was perceptive enough to know it, and honest enough not to pretend she didn't, and careful enough not to pull at it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She closed the folder and went to start dinner, and Nathan went out to the dock and sat at the end of it with the heron, who had developed a habit of appearing when he came out here alone, which he was aware was a coincidence, but appreciated anyway. The thing he hadn't said, the shape of the thing he was being patient about, had gotten considerably harder to be patient about in the last 20 minutes. Knowing that she was planning to leave, knowing she had a timeline now, 30 days processing, then the lease, then the renovation, then the opening, and somewhere in there she'd find an apartment and she and Rosie would go, and the guest room with the blue quilt would be empty again, and Sophie would lose Rosie's drawer full of things, and the kitchen would go back to smelling like the pasta he overcooked. He sat with that for a while. He was not going to make the timeline about himself. He was not going to let the fact that he didn't want her to leave become pressure on someone who had just spent 8 months having no options and was finally building some. He knew what it looked like when people with resources used those resources to create dependency in people without them, even when the intent wasn't malicious, and he was not going to do that. He would not be the gravity that kept her in orbit. But he was also sitting here on the dock watching the late afternoon light do its thing on the water and feeling the absence of a thing that hadn't happened yet, like it had already happened, and that was new. He hadn't felt that in 3 years. The anticipatory loss of something still present. I thought about what Emily had said on the porch that first week, about the loneliness. It doesn't stop being the present just because you got used to it. He'd said is instead of was, and she'd heard that and named it. He picked up a flat stone from the dock boards. There was always one. Sophie collected them and turned it over in his hand. He was 40 days into knowing her. That was not very long. That was not the basis for anything declarative. He put the stone in his pocket and went inside. The nights had developed their own rhythm too, separate from the days. The girls went to bed around 8:30, and Nathan and Emily inevitably ended up in the same general area of the house. The kitchen, the back porch, occasionally the living room. Not by arrangement, but by the simple gravitational logic of two adults who had become accustomed to each other's company. They talked, or they didn't. Emily read. Nathan worked. Sometimes they watched something on television with the kind of comfortable disinterest of people who are in the same room, more for the being together than the watching. He'd learned things about her the way you learn things about people when you spend ordinary time with them rather than special time. She ran cold. She was always slightly too cold in the house, and had started keeping a sweater on the arm of the couch. She had opinions about news coverage that were articulate and specific, and she'd had them since before any of her current circumstances, meaning they were genuinely hers. She was harder on herself in private than she presented in conversation, doing a kind of quiet self-accounting that he caught glimpses of when she thought he wasn't watching. A moment at the kitchen window running something over in her mind. A pause in the middle of a task where she'd check something invisible. She was funny in the deadpan way of people who had decided not to spend emotional energy on anything that couldn't take the weight of irony. She'd started calling him out on things, which he'd noticed had begun around the end of the second week. Small things, when he was performing composure rather than feeling it, when his patience was slightly too deliberate, when he was arranging something for her benefit under the guise of practical reasoning. She said it without cruelty, just observation, and she was always right, and he found that he didn't mind being right about. He'd been around enough people who saw what they wanted to see, that accuracy, even uncomfortable accuracy, felt like something worth protecting. The conversation that changed things happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the diner, on the back porch. After a day that had been unremarkable in all its parts, but had somehow accumulated into something heavy. Sophie had come home from school upset, not willing to talk about it directly, but moving through the house with the compressed unhappiness of a child processing something. Nathan had done what he knew to do, which was to be present and not push, and by dinner Sophie was talking again, though carefully. Later, after bedtime, Emily had come out to the porch and said, "She told me at bath time. There's a girl at school who said something about her mom, about not having a mom." Nathan went still. "Not cruel," Emily said quickly. "Just kids do this thing where they don't know something is a wound. They just poke it because it's different. This girl didn't know." She paused. Sophie said she told her that her mom died and the girl said she was sorry, and Sophie said it's okay, and then they just went back to recess. Sophie said she was fine. "Is she?" "I think so," Emily said. "But she cried a little. In the bath. The kind that's quick, like you're letting out pressure, not the kind that goes on." She paused. "I held her for a minute and she let me. She doesn't usually let people." Something moved through Nathan that was complicated and warm and almost too large. "Thank you," he said. "She came and found me," Emily said. It wasn't my place to push. She came and found me." He looked out at the lake. "She trusts you," he said. "She trusts you," Emily said, "and she's got good instincts. I think she extended some of that trust to me because of you." She paused. "That's a big thing to extend." "She's been in my corner for 3 years," Nathan said. "Just her and me, mostly. She watches everything. She knows who I'm actually comfortable with." He paused. "She put Rosie in her drawer." Emily looked at him. "She made a labeled drawer in her room," he said, "for Rosie's things. She didn't tell me. I found it." Emily was quiet for a moment. The frogs were at it, and the lake was dark, and the night was warm. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah. I don't want this to be a thing where I owe you something," she said. "I need you to hear that. Whatever is happening between us, and I know something is happening, I'm not pretending it isn't, I can't have it be tangled up with what you've done for us. Financially, practically. The debt, the school enrollment, all of it. I can't." She stopped. "I need those things to be what they are, which is generosity, and I need what's between us to be a separate thing that either exists on its own or doesn't. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I understand completely," he said. "Because if I feel something because you saved us from a bad situation, that's not real," she said. "That's gratitude with better lighting. I don't want that. And I don't think you want that either." "No," he said. "I don't." She was looking at him. He was looking at the lake. "So I need to ask you something," she said. "Directly." He looked at her then. "If none of this had happened," she said, "no diner, no storm, no loan, no any of it. If we had just met somewhere, in a normal way, and you were just a person and I was just a person, would you?" She stopped. "Is this—" She pressed her lips together. "Do you feel something for me that's about me, specifically, or is it about the situation?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You're the most honest person I've met in years," he said. "You walked out of a diner in a rainstorm to protect your pride rather than let a stranger feel sorry for you. You made stew from your grandmother's recipe in my kitchen to stay even. You came back from a property showing and told me you were scared and it might go wrong because you thought I deserved the real answer. You argued with me about a loan repayment structure because you needed the story of it to be yours." He paused. "None of that is about the situation. All of that is about you." She was very still. "I was in that diner because of a logistics problem," he said. "I noticed you because of how Rosie was looking at the food. Everything after that is because of you." He paused. "That's the real answer." She looked at him for a long time. The frogs, the lake, the warm night. "I feel something too," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not ready to know what to do with it yet." "Okay," he said. "That doesn't bother you?" "You're still here," he said. "That's enough for now." She looked at him for another moment, then she looked at the lake. Then she said quietly, "The armchairs go in the left corner, under the afternoon light. That's the first thing I'm going to buy when I open." "Armchairs?" he said. "Two of them," she said, "comfortable ones. The kind that say, 'Sit here and stay a while.'" He nodded. "That's what a bookstore is, really," she said. "It's permission to stay somewhere." She was talking to the lake now, not to him. "That's what I missed most. Having a place that said you can be here. You don't have to go anywhere." He thought about that. He thought about a diner off Highway 16 in a rainstorm, and a woman who had tried to leave before anyone noticed her, and a little girl with her hand in her mother's looking at food with a carefully neutral face. He thought about offering a table and getting this in return. This woman on his porch talking about armchairs and permission and the right to stay somewhere. He thought he'd gotten considerably more than he'd offered. He didn't say any of that. He just sat with her on the porch while the night did what nights did, and let the shape of things continue forming in whatever direction they were going, and tried to be, as she'd said, steady. Not because he was, but because she needed steady, and he could do that, and that was enough for tonight. The loan was approved on a Friday, 31 days after Elena Vasquez had said 30 days, which Emily noted was 1 day late, and which Elena said was due to a processing backlog, and which Emily accepted without complaint because 1 day was nothing against everything else. She called Nathan from the bank parking lot. He was in Dallas for 2 days for a board meeting he hadn't been able to reschedule, and when his phone buzzed and he saw her name, he stepped out of the conference room mid-sentence with a brief apology to 8 people who were used to him doing this and had learned to wait. "It came through," she said. He stood in the corridor outside the conference room with the muffled sound of his board members behind the glass door, and felt something simple and complete move through him. "All of it?" he said. "Working capital and the commercial improvement financing both," she said. Elena said the improvement number came in at the high end of what she'd expected. "The renovation can start on schedule." A pause. "I'm sitting in my car in the bank parking lot, and I'm trying not to be ridiculous about it." "Be as ridiculous as you want," he said. "There's no one there." A sound from her end that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. "I keep thinking it's going to get taken back," she said. "Like someone's going to knock on the window and say there was a mistake." "Nobody's knocking," he said. "I know." Another pause. "Nathan." "Yeah. Thank you," she said. "For Elena. For the referral." "You did the projections," he said. "Elena said they were sound. That's not me." "I know, but you opened the door." She paused. "I'm going to stop saying thank you for individual things because there's too many of them, and I'm losing track, so this is a standing thank you. For the whole of it. I want you to know that I know." He leaned against the corridor wall. Down the hall, someone's phone rang twice and went to voicemail. "I know you know," he said. "Okay," she said. "Good." He heard her take a breath. "Go back to your meeting. I'm going to call Pete Okafor." "Tell him to start Monday," Nathan said. "I was going to tell him to start Monday," she said, mildly, with the tone she used when he said something she'd already decided, and she wanted him to know she'd gotten there first. He smiled against the phone. "Call me tonight." "I will," she said. I went back into the conference room and 8 people looked at him and he said, "Sorry, where were we?" And the meeting continued, but for the rest of it he was running at about 70% presence, and the other 30% was on Dunmore Street with the afternoon light coming through the front windows at an angle Emily had described twice, and that he'd never seen but felt he could picture clearly. He came home Sunday evening to a house that smelled like whatever Emily had put in the slow cooker that morning, and Sophie came down the stairs to meet him with paint on her shirt and the information that Rosie had named the new turtle Gerald II, after the original Gerald, as a tribute. "That's good naming," Nathan said. "Rosie takes naming seriously," Sophie said, in the tone of someone who respected this quality deeply. He set his bag down and went to the kitchen, and Emily was at the table with her laptop and what appeared to be a detailed floor plan drawn in pencil on graph paper, the kind of methodical 2-scale diagram that you make when you've been thinking about something for a long time, and finally have the freedom to put it on paper. She looked up. "How was the board meeting?" she said. "Long," he said. "Necessary. Fine." He looked at the graph paper. "Is that the floor plan?" "I've been doing it for 2 days," she said, slightly defensive. "I needed to know where everything goes before Pete starts the walls." He sat down across from her. She turned the graph paper toward him. It was meticulous. The dimensions were labeled. the shelving runs sketched in their designated positions, traffic flow indicated with light pencil arrows. In the left corner, two small rectangles with a narrow table between them. She'd labeled them simply chairs. He looked at the chairs on the paper for a moment. You put them exactly where you said, he said. Where else would they go? She said, which was not a question. He studied the rest of the plan. She'd thought about the children's section, tucked in the back corner, low shelves, presumably because low shelves were less threatening to small people, and because the back corner meant children wouldn't be right at the entrance getting underfoot during heavier traffic. She'd put the staff counter off-center rather than centered, which most retail spaces did reflexively, because centering the counter cut the room in half and made it feel like a transaction rather than an invitation. The counter placement is smart, he said. I hated how centered counters feel like a checkpoint, she said, like you have to get past someone to be allowed in. She paused. A bookstore should feel like you walked into someone's living room. The counter should be the place you end up, not the place you start. He handed the plan back. She looked at it with the expression she had when something was both finished and just beginning, the same expression she'd had in the bank parking lot, he imagined, the verge of something held carefully. Pete says 4 weeks on the renovation if nothing goes wrong, she said, and then inventory setup, which I can do myself mostly. And then, she stopped, looked at the plan, and then it's open. Have you thought about the name? He said. She looked up. What do you mean? The store name, he said. Morrison's is gone. This is something new. She looked at him for a moment like the question had arrived from an unexpected direction. I've been thinking about it, she said slowly. I haven't said it out loud yet. You don't have to, he said. Dawson's, she said. Just that. Simple and clean. He nodded. It sounds presumptuous, she said. It sounds like yours, he said. Something settled in her face. Yeah, she said quietly. That's the idea. The renovation started Monday as planned, and Emily went to Dunmore Street every morning for the first week to check Pete's progress and ask questions that Pete answered with the patient thoroughness of a man who had worked with enough anxious clients to know that the anxiety was usually about something larger than the specific question being asked. He gave her honest answers about what was going well and what wasn't, which she appreciated because the previous landlord's contractor had told her only what she wanted to hear, and that had cost everyone time and money later. The left wall came down and went back up in 5 days. The electrical upgrade took a week. The floors, which were original wood underneath 2 layers of poorly installed vinyl, turned out to be salvageable, beautiful even, once Pete's crew stripped them back. Emily stood in the empty space on a Thursday afternoon and looked at the floors and called Nathan. The floors, she said when he picked up. Yeah, they're original oak. She paused. Nathan, they're the most beautiful floors. He heard it in her voice. The specific warmth of something going right after so long of things going wrong. He didn't make it more than it was. He just said, good floors matter. They do, she said with great conviction. She came home that evening with sawdust in her hair and the floor of the car tracked with construction grit. And Rosie said, Mama, you have wood in your hair. And Emily said, I know, it's been a good day. And Rosie accepted this information as sufficient. Nathan watched the two of them at the dinner table that night. Rosie explaining to Sophie the naming logic behind Gerald II. Emily half listening while finishing a paragraph she was writing, something for the store's social media presence that she was building from scratch, and thought about what his daughter had said on the porch swing. She looks at things like she's actually looking at them. Sophie had been right. Emily had a quality of presence that was rare, and it had nothing to do with extraordinary circumstances. It was just how she was, in ordinary moments. In a kitchen at 6:30 in the evening, with sawdust in her hair and a paragraph on her laptop and a daughter explaining turtle genealogy beside her. He was in love with her. He'd known it for a while in the way that you know things before you're ready to name them, carrying it around and examining it in peripheral vision without looking directly at it. And then one Thursday evening in the kitchen it was simply named, the way the thing on the counter eventually tells you where it belongs, and there it was. He was in love with her, and she was leaving in a few weeks, and he had told her that would be fine. He held to that. He had meant it when he said it, and he meant it now. Emily rebuilding herself into someone who didn't need the lake house was the whole point. It was the only version of this that worked. The version where she stood in her own place, her own store, on her own floors, and knew she had done it. Anything that compromised that version was not something he was willing to do. But he was also going to tell her how he felt. Not as pressure, not as a reason to stay, just because she'd asked him, on the porch, whether what he felt was about her specifically or about the situation, and he'd answered honestly, and she'd said she wasn't ready to know what to do with it yet. He was going to give her the full version of the honest answer before she left, because she deserved it, and because performing casualness about it would be a lie of omission, and Emily had always been able to tell when he was managing the truth. The how and when of it occupied a part of his mind for the next 2 weeks, in the way that important things run in the background while you're handling everything in the foreground. In the foreground, Hale Global's quarterly earnings, which were strong enough in 3 divisions and needed attention in 1. Roy Estes's termination, which his legal team handled cleanly and which Nathan felt no satisfaction about. 9 years was 9 years, and fraud was still fraud, and both things were true. Sophie's parent-teacher conference, which revealed that she was reading 2 grade levels ahead and struggling to stay interested during lessons she'd already mastered, a problem. Nathan recognized from his own school experience, and which the teacher handled with more creativity than Nathan's teachers had. Rosie's school adjustment, which had been smoother than anyone anticipated, and which the principal attributed to Sophie's matter-of-fact social sponsorship of the new girl, introducing her to her own friends with the democratic authority of someone who had decided how things were going to be. In the background, the timing of a conversation he hadn't had yet. Emily moved her things out on a Saturday morning, 5 weeks after the loan had been approved. She'd found an apartment 2 weeks earlier, a 2-bedroom on Clearfield Avenue, 12 minutes from Dunmore Street, on the 3rd floor of a building with a working elevator and a laundry room in the basement, and a landlord named Mrs. Park, who had very specific rules about the recycling and a policy of no pets that Rosie had accepted with dignity. The first and last month's deposit had come from the working capital portion of the SBA loan, accounted for properly in Emily's business documentation because she had structured it that way from the start, folding her personal transition costs into the business plan as founders' expenses with a clear repayment timeline. Nathan had reviewed none of this. She hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't offered. He'd found out when she told him, the same way he found out about most of the things she was building, after she'd built them. Moving day was not dramatic. Emily had been clear about this. She'd asked him the week before if it was okay if she moved out on Saturday, and if he could keep Rosie occupied while she made a few trips, and he'd said yes to both. She didn't want it to be a production. She didn't want Rosie to have a hard morning about leaving what had become, in the space of a month, the most stable home the child had known in almost a year. What she hadn't anticipated was Sophie. Nathan was at the dock with Rosie when he heard the screen door and turned to see Sophie standing on the porch, with the particular expression she had when she was holding something together by effort. Rosie looked at Sophie, and then at Nathan, and then at Sophie again and said, "Are you sad?" Sophie came down to the dock. She sat next to Rosie on the boards and put her feet over the edge and didn't say anything for a moment. "I know you're not going far," Sophie said finally. 12 minutes, Rosie said, with the specificity of someone who had been told this number and had been using it as a talisman. "That's close," Sophie said. "That's close," Rosie agreed. "You still go to the same school," Sophie said. "Same school," Rosie said. They sat for a moment in the particular silence of 2 children processing a goodbye. That wasn't really a goodbye but felt like one because they were too young to fully trust that things that went away came back. "Your drawer is yours," Sophie said. "I'm not reassigning it." Rosie looked at her. "It's still your drawer," Sophie said, "for when you come over." Rosie was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned over and put her head briefly on Sophie's shoulder, the way small children do when they want to give comfort, but don't have the words. Clumsy and complete and absolutely certain. Sophie sat very still and let her, and Nathan looked at the lake and felt something in his throat he was not going to examine in front of the children. Emily made 3 trips in her car, and Nathan helped carry the last of it. The slow cooker, which was hers, and which he'd been using for a month without asking, a bag of children's books, a box of things from the garage that had been in her car and had migrated inside gradually. They drove over in 2 cars, Nathan following, and he carried boxes up 3 flights because the elevator was working but slow, and carrying boxes felt like something he could do. Mrs. Park came out to inspect the situation with the particular vigilance of a landlord who had seen too many move-in days become problems and had developed a prophylactic watchfulness as a result. She looked at Emily's things with assessment, looked at Nathan with deeper assessment, said nothing to him directly, and told Emily that the recycling guidelines were posted in the laundry room and that she expected them to be followed. "I'll follow them," Emily said. "The blue bin is glass only," Mrs. Park said. "Understood," Emily said. Mrs. Park nodded once, satisfied, and went back inside. Emily stood in the middle of her new empty living room with the boxes around her and Rosie exploring the second bedroom with the thoroughness of a property inspector, her footsteps running back and forth on the wood floor overhead. "It echoes," Emily said. "I forgot how empty apartments echo." "You'll fill it," Nathan said. She looked around. The afternoon light came through the windows at an angle that was different from Dunmore Street, less dramatic, but clean. The floors were not original oak. They were standard laminate, perfectly functional, nothing remarkable. "It's mine," she said. Not to him exactly, to the room. To the fact of it. He didn't say anything. Some moments needed to be hers without commentary. Rosie appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. "My room is bigger than at the old apartment," she announced. "Is it?" Emily said. "I measured it in feet," Rosie said. "With my feet. 14 feet by 12 feet. That's a unit of measurement, yes," Emily said. "Rosie feet," Rosie said, and went back to continue the assessment. Emily smiled at the empty room. Then she looked at Nathan. "You should go," she said. Not cruelly, just with a clarity that he recognized, the clarity of someone who needed to be alone in their new beginning without the presence of someone from the previous chapter. "I know," he said. She walked him to the door. They stood in the doorway with the third-floor landing behind him and the empty apartment behind her and the sound of Rosie's feet on the bedroom floor above the echo. He had been waiting for the right time to say the thing he'd been carrying. He'd imagined various versions of it, and this was not the version he'd imagined, standing in a doorway with moving boxes visible behind her. But he understood suddenly that waiting for the perfectly right time was a way of never saying it, and he'd already given too much time to perfect conditions. "I'm going to say something," he said. She looked at him. She already knew. He could see that she already knew, but she was giving him the room to say it. "I'm not saying it to change anything," he said. "You've built this, the apartment, the store, the loan, the whole of it, and that's yours, and I'm not trying to complicate it. I told you on the porch that I felt something, and that was the partial answer. The full answer is that I'm in love with you." He held her gaze. "That's all. That's the whole statement. No requirements attached to it." She was very still. "You don't have to respond to that right now," he said. "Nathan, I mean it," he said. "I just wanted you to have the full truth of it. What you do with it is yours." She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was complicated in a way that was not bad. It was the complicated of something real being handled carefully rather than dismissed. "I know what I feel," she said quietly. "I've known for a while. I'm still finding the floor under me. Do you understand that? I'm still figuring out who I am when I'm not in a crisis." "I understand completely," he said. "Because the person I am when I'm not in a crisis might be different," she said. "I need to find out who that person is before I ask someone else to know her." "That's the most reasonable thing I've ever heard," he said. She looked at him. "You're not going to argue with me?" "No," he said. "You're just going to—" "What? Wait. I'm going to go home and help Sophie with whatever project she's currently making my life complicated with," he said. "And you're going to unpack your boxes and go to Dunmore Street on Monday and open your store in 2 weeks. And after that, we'll see what we are when we're both just people living their lives." He paused. "That's enough. That's a good thing to be building toward." She looked at him for a long time in the doorway. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, which she had not done before. Not in the way that this was, full and deliberate, her face against his shoulder for a moment. He put one hand against her back and held still and let her be the one to step back first, which she did after a few seconds. And she looked at him when she stepped back with an expression that was open in a way he hadn't seen before. Not guarded, not managing, not working something out, just open. 12 minutes, she said. 12 minutes, he said. She nodded once and went back inside. He went down the stairs and drove home. And the lake house felt the way it felt the first week after Amanda died. That specific acoustic quality of a space where something had been and wasn't anymore. He sat on the porch for a while, and then Sophie came out and sat next to him and said, without preamble, "Do you love Emily?" He looked at his daughter. "I'm asking because I want to know," Sophie said. "Not to make it weird." "Yeah," he said. "I do." Sophie nodded. I thought so, she said. You get a specific face. What face? Like you're being careful with something, she said. You used to have it with Mom. Not the same exactly, but similar. He looked at the lake. Is that okay with you? He said. Sophie thought about this for a moment with the serious consideration she gave everything that deserved it. Mom would want you to be happy, she said. I've thought about this. I think she would want that. She paused. And I like Emily. She's honest. She doesn't talk down to me. Another pause. And Rosie has a drawer here. She does, Nathan said. So, Sophie said, and stood up from the swing and went back inside, the matter apparently settled to her satisfaction. Nathan sat on the porch a while longer. The lake held the evening light the way it always did. 14 turtles, or close enough, somewhere in the shallows. The swing squeaked when it moved, the same squeak it had always had. I thought about a rainy night in a diner off Highway 16 and a woman trying to leave quietly, and a little girl's careful face. He thought about the things that hinge on a moment, the ones you can see coming and the ones that arrive sideways and change the entire direction of a life before you've understood what's happening. He had done a simple thing, stood up from a booth and said, "Would you like to sit down?" That was all. And from that one ordinary act of paying attention had come every single thing that followed. The stew from a Louisiana grandmother's recipe, the loan agreement with the left-leaning signature, the turtle named Gerald II, his daughter's arms around a smaller girl on a dock, a woman in a new apartment standing in afternoon light saying it's mine to an empty room. It wasn't a lesson he could clean up into something neat. Life wasn't constructed that way, with lessons that fit inside sentences. But if there was something true in it, it was this. The moments that matter most are rarely the big ones. They're the ones where you notice something you could have not noticed, where you stand up when you could have stayed seated, where you offer a table in a rainstorm to someone trying to leave before anyone sees them. They're the ones where you choose not to look away. The Dunmore Street store opened on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks later. Emily had chosen Thursday because the retired teacher who would become her first regular, a woman named Barbara, who had driven past the renovation every week and had knocked on the door 3 days before opening to ask when, had Thursdays free. Emily had not told anyone else this reason. Nathan had figured it out when he saw Barbara already in the left corner armchair at 10:15 in the morning, 20 minutes after opening, with a book open in her lap and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this specific chair for longer than she'd known it existed. The 2 armchairs had arrived the week before. Emily had bought them at an estate sale outside the city. Not expensive, not beautiful in any formal sense, but sturdy and deep and covered in a fabric that was the color of old maps. She and Nathan had carried them up the Dunmore Street steps together on a Sunday morning, which involved a tight corner on the landing that required renegotiation and a moment where Nathan had said something under his breath that made Emily laugh and lose her grip, which nearly cost them the left armchair entirely. "You almost dropped it," he said. "You made me laugh," she said. "I didn't do it on purpose." "You did," she said. They got both chairs in and set them in the left corner under the afternoon light and stood back and looked at them, and the room felt finished in a way that rooms rarely feel, like it had been waiting for exactly these specific imperfect chairs. The opening day was not a grand event. Emily had not wanted a grand event. She'd posted on the store's social media accounts, put a sign in the window 2 weeks out, reached out personally to a dozen people from the Regional Bookseller Association, and to the former Morrison's regulars she still had contact information for. By noon there were 11 people in the store, which for a first day in a 1,200-square-foot independent bookstore in a neighborhood that didn't know it yet was, by any honest measure, a strong start. Nathan came at 11:30 with Sophie and Rosie, having been specifically told he was welcome after 11 because Emily wanted the first hour to be hers alone. He stood at the front door and looked at the space. The floors were right. The light was right. The shelving ran at angles that created pockets, small, semi-private areas where you could stop and browse without feeling exposed, without feeling like you were on display. The children's section in the back corner had low shelves and 2 beanbag chairs that Rosie immediately claimed and then immediately invited Sophie to share. The staff counter was off to the right, exactly where the floor plan had put it, not a checkpoint, but a landing spot. And in the left corner, Barbara sat in one of the armchairs with her book, and across from her sat a man Nathan didn't recognize, maybe 65, reading something with the focused ease of a person who has been given permission to stay somewhere and has taken it fully. Emily was behind the counter talking to a woman about a recommendation, using her hands the way she did when she was genuinely engaged with something, specific and direct and unhesitant. She looked up when Nathan came in, and their eyes met across the store, and she smiled. Not the managed, carefully sized smile she'd been keeping small for months, but the full one, the one that had briefly appeared under diner lights on a rainy night, and that Nathan had been thinking about since. He smiled back. He didn't go to the counter. She was working. He browsed the shelves with the genuine interest of someone who read and respected that the shelves had been curated rather than just filled. There was a logic to the organization, a sensibility he recognized as Emily's. Not pure genre, not pure alphabet, but something more intuitive, books grouped by feel as much as category, by who might want them next to what. Sophie found the section she wanted immediately, which did not surprise him. Rosie came back from the beanbag chairs long enough to ask him if she could have a book about turtles, specifically sea turtles, and specifically one with photographs. And he said yes, and she went to find Emily to ask where that section was, which involved a 3-minute consultation that Nathan could see from across the store, and that ended with Rosie carrying a book back to the beanbag chair with the expression of someone whose needs had been precisely understood. I was looking at a novel whose back cover had caught his attention when Emily appeared beside him. Good first morning, he said. 13 sales by noon, she said. Barbara has already told 2 people about the store while sitting in the chair. She's essentially free marketing. You planned that, he said. I was hoping for it, she said. There was a distinction she cared about in that. He put the novel back. Then he picked it up again. Get it, she said. I was thinking about it. You've been looking at it for 6 minutes, she said. Get the book. He got the book. She rang it up at the off-center counter, and when she handed him the bag, she held it for 1 extra second, not long, just a beat, and looked at him the way she had in the doorway of the Clearfield Avenue apartment. Open, not managed. 12 minutes, she said quietly. 12 minutes, he said. She let go of the bag and went to help another customer, and he stood at the counter for a moment with his novel in a paper bag, and the afternoon light doing its thing across the oak floors, and Rosie in the beanbag chair with her sea turtle book, and Sophie in the back shelves probably reading the first 3 chapters of something she was going to ask him to buy. He thought about what Emily had said on the porch, about a bookstore being permission to stay somewhere. You can be here. You don't have to go anywhere. He looked around the room, at Barbara in the left armchair, and the stranger across from her and Rosie's feet visible above a beanbag chair, and Emily's voice from somewhere in the shelves saying something specific and warm to a customer. I thought that was it, actually. That was the whole thing that mattered. Not the money, not the logistics empire, not the 14,000 trucks, or the Forbes profile, or any of the scaffolding that the public version of his life was built on. It was this, a room where people were given permission to stay, a table offered in a rainstorm, a labeled drawer, 2 imperfect armchairs under afternoon light, the shape of things, formed. He went to find his daughter. She was, as predicted, 3 chapters into a book she was going to ask him to buy. He looked at the cover. He looked at her face. She was completely gone into it, that particular quality of absorption she'd had since she was 4 years old, the one that Amanda had always said meant she would either be a writer or the best kind of reader, which were not so different. We're getting that too, he said. I know, Sophie said, without looking up. He left her to her 3 chapters and went to the beanbag chair section and sat on the floor next to Rosie, who made room without being asked, and looked at the sea turtles with her. And she explained each photograph to him with the careful authority of someone who had recently done extensive research and wanted to make sure it was used. Outside on Dunmore Street, the Thursday afternoon did what Thursday afternoons did. People walked past. Some stopped to look at the window display. 2 came in. The light moved across the oak floors the way it had the first time Emily had stood in this space and known where the armchairs went. The heron was presumably on the lake, doing its still, patient thing. Gerald II was presumably on a rock somewhere. Nathan Hale sat on a bookstore floor with a sea turtle book, and a 6-year-old explaining migration patterns to him, and from somewhere in the shelves he could hear Emily's voice, specific and warm, telling someone exactly what they needed to read next. He thought, this is what forward feels like, not the absence of what was lost, not the replacement of it, just forward. The next true thing arrived at honestly, through a rainstorm and a diner and a month of learning the shape of someone, imperfect and real and present. He turned a page. Rosie pointed at a photograph. That one's migrating, she said. Where to? He said. Where it needs to go, she said, with perfect 6-year-old certainty. He looked at the photograph. He thought about that. Where it needs to go. I thought that was exactly right.